Chapter 1037. After all the three-dimensional talismans were overlapped, Luo Fan still did not stop sketching. As he continued to sketch, layers of three-dimensional talisman shadows began to rise on the surface of the spherical three-dimensional talisman. Then, they suddenly shrank and entered the spherical three-dimensional talisman. It looked like layers of spherical three-dimensional talisman layers were constantly merging into the three-dimensional talisman sphere out of thin air. At this moment, more than 10 breaths had passed. However, whether it was the law realm or the three-dimensional talisman, they were not damaged because of more than 10 breaths. On the contrary, a faint light began to radiate from the surface of the three-dimensional talisman sphere. Although the light was not as strong as the light at the beginning, it was still endless. This meant that the three-dimensional talisman had enough power to completely isolate the gray existence in the surroundings, so that the gray existence could no longer corrode the three-dimensional talisman, let alone the law realm that was enveloped by the three-dimensional talisman. Luo Fan continued to sketch in the void. After every few movements, the three-dimensional talisman shadow flashed on the three-dimensional talisman sphere. Every time the three-dimensional talisman shadow flashed, the light emitted by the three-dimensional talisman became a little more intense. Luo Fan sketched for a full 10 days and 10 nights before he stopped. When he stopped, the light emitted by the three-dimensional talisman ball was tens of thousands of times more intense than it had been before the change. Even the dusky existence in the surroundings was pierced through by this light. It directly changed the appearance of the grayish existence within an unknown radius, revealing all sorts of strange and magnificent sceneries. It's finally done. So this is the mystery of the aura rune structure. No wonder it has such power. It can actually make it easier for cultivators to comprehend the Tao. So it's because of this. Luo Fan sighed, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. What he had sketched in the void for the past 10 days and 10 nights were not other things, but words. He had sketched in this gray area for 10 days and 10 nights, which was equivalent to writing an article for 10 days and 10 nights. With the power of Luo Fan's current magic power, 10 days and 10 nights were enough for him to write an article. He had written an article with hundreds of millions of words. This article was none other than an article about the Tao Master Realm. It was his own understanding of the Tao Master Realm, all kinds of feelings, and all kinds of descriptions of how to achieve the Tao Master Realm. Its nature was actually the same as the text describing the way of the sage that he had obtained from the rune structure of the aura. The only difference was, the article that described the way of the saints was written by the saints. It was enough to completely contain all the mysteries of the way of the saints in the article. It could make the article endless. The number of words that reached the limit of what could be described by numbers was only 1 in a trillion. However, the article written by Luo Fan only talked about the mystery of the Tao Master Realm, which was to say, the mystery of Tao Master. Although it was difficult to describe this mystery with words, Luo Fan's own understanding could be clearly described with words. Therefore, such an article describing the mystery of Tao Master. In other words, there was a limit to the number of words. Therefore, because of this, Luo Fan was able to spend 10 days and 10 nights to completely write that article. At this moment, the number of words in this article was hundreds of millions. The mystery of the Tao Master Realm described in such an article was insignificant compared to a real Tao Master. However, this was already the limit of what Luo Fan could do. At least for him at this time, it was the limit of what he could do. After all, at this time, Luo Fan had just stepped into the Tao Master Realm and become a Tao Master. In such a realm, ordinary practitioners would only know how it was, but not why it was. It was extremely rare for Luo Fan to spend hundreds of millions of words to describe a general outline of it. The fundamental reason why the three-dimensional talisman sphere had such a change was that Luo Fan directly used the method of the aura rune structure to outline the article in a gray haze and directly integrated it into the spherical three-dimensional talisman. He directly combined the 99 three-dimensional talisman layers into words in different order and completely integrated the article into it. He used the different order to carry the article. This was because he did not imitate them. Instead, he used his own understanding to understand the mysteries within and then changed to a more suitable method for three-dimensional talismans. The structure of this three-dimensional talisman layer was different from the structure of the aura talisman. Among them, each three-dimensional talisman layer did not form a three-dimensional talisman void, but an existence like an eggshell. As one layer of the 3D talisman went deeper, another layer of 3D talisman went deeper, and another layer of 3D talisman went deeper, and another layer of 3D talisman went deeper. In this way, the 99 layers of 3D talisman went deeper, until the hundreds of millions of characters were completely used up, and the number of three-dimensional talisman needed for each word was different. Some needed more than 90, some needed 60 or 70, some only needed 20 or 30, and some even only needed 3 or 4 or 5. Therefore, although there were hundreds of millions of words, the final three-dimensional talisman layer did not exceed the number of billions. From a distance, it looked like billions of layers of eggshells, arranged layer by layer, compressed into a thin layer, like a film directly wrapping the law realm. Using the three-dimensional talisman layer to carry the article was not simply carrying it. Luo Fan would not be so bored. The reason why he used the three-dimensional talisman to carry the article, or rather, to integrate the article into the arrangement of the three-dimensional talisman, was because the moment when Luo Fan was about to construct the three-dimensional talisman sphere, a thought flashed across his mind like lightning. It made him instantly understand why the structure of the aura rune was so mysterious and why it had such an incredible effect. The fundamental reason was not anything else, nor was it any special structure. It was not because of any talisman, but because of the article about the path of the sage. This article about the path of the sage was so well hidden. It was obviously not for some cultivators to read or listen to. If Luo Fan did not coincidentally use a method that other cultivators could not use to analyze such an article, how could he have analyzed it? How could he have obtained it? Since this was the case, such an article was not written for cultivators, nor was it written for living beings. Then what was the purpose of this article? Could it be that the sage was bored and wanted to entertain himself? From here, it could be deduced just by analyzing it. This article was written for existences that were neither cultivators nor living beings. In other words, such an article about the path of the sage was written for heaven and earth, for all things, for time, and for space. It was even written for the state of chaos. Even heaven and earth, all things, space-time, and chaos had no will. Who said that without will and spiritual consciousness, one could not read an article? Wasn't the transformation of heaven and earth the same as writing an article for heaven and earth to read, thereby changing heaven and earth? And when a cultivator opened a cave abode, wasn't the establishment of a Taoist field to use one's will as an article for heaven and earth to read, thereby changing heaven and earth? Although these methods were crude, in essence, there was not much difference from writing an article for heaven and earth, all things, space-time, and chaos to read. Therefore, it could be said that heaven and earth, the reason why all things, space-time, and chaos could not read an article was that the method of writing the article was wrong, but the method used was not clever enough. For example, the article that described the Tao of sages contained in the rune structure was obviously a brilliant and mysterious method that could allow the world, all living things, time, space, and even chaos to understand the article. Therefore, the carrier of the article would be endowed with all kinds of power and become unfathomable and mysterious. The fundamental reason why the aura rune structure was so mysterious, so unfathomable, and so incomprehensible to ordinary living beings was that the article about the path of the sage was sufficiently profound and unfathomable. As for the other things, such as the runes, the strength of the aura, and the specific structure of the rune layer, these were just minor details and insignificant. Since he knew all of this in an instant, Luo Fan naturally completely understood how to fully exert the magical effect of the three-dimensional talisman layer. Therefore, the article about the mystery of the town master realm, which he had outlined for 10 days and 10 nights, appeared. The article about the mystery of the town master realm was naturally many times inferior to the article about the path of the sage, and could not even be mentioned in the same breath. However, the town master realm was, after all, the highest realm below the sage, so it was needless to say that it was mysterious and mysterious. Once such an article was written, ordinary practitioners could even start from scratch step by step and finally cultivate to the town master realm by relying on such an article. If such an article was presented to heaven and earth, all things, space-time, and chaos to let them read and understand such an article, it could naturally make the carrier of this article have incredible magical effects and contain incredible power. This magical effect and power, even if it was far inferior to the structure of the aura rune, was certainly countless times better than the original messy structure. It was precisely because of this that such a situation had occurred, causing the structure of the three-dimensional rune sphere to directly transform into such an inconceivable state. Its degree of sturdiness was even more than 10,000 times stronger than before, and there were even various indescribable powers added to it. Looking at the changes of the spherical, three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan nodded to himself. He took a step forward and entered the three-dimensional talisman, entering the law realm. There was not much change in the law realm compared to before. The profound sage-to-be and Wu Dao Zi's doppelganger, who had been subdued by Luo Fan, had also completely integrated into the cultivation world of the law realm. At this moment, there was no one on the mountain where the image of Luo Fan existed. It was because they had discovered in the process of using their divine avatars to walk through the law realm that it was impossible to use such a method to achieve true breakthroughs and progress. Unless they completely immersed themselves in it, they could only nurture their divine avatars to their current level at the very most. It was not beneficial to them at all. As for those who had originally settled down on the surface of the three-dimensional talisman, they had already learned how unrealistic it was to cultivate there after tens of thousands of years. They had also completely integrated into the law realm. At this moment, apart from Luo Fan, it was likely that they themselves would not be able to discover each other. Luo Fan floated in the void. He didn't need to use any sacred art to naturally conceal himself. He wasn't discovered by any living beings in this world. He stood there and looked down at the law realm. He sensed the various changes in the law realm and gained a deeper understanding of the law world. As a result, his law world view was slightly enriched. This method is indeed useful. Luo Fan sighed. He was quite satisfied, although he had only slightly enriched the law world view, and if he had not paid special attention to it, he would not have discovered this enrichment. This was already enough for Luo Fan. It had only been tens of thousands of years, but it was already enough to change the law world view. As time passed, the prospects would be extremely promising. How could he not be satisfied? He had not come here to reap the rewards that the law realm had brought him. He had come here to change the sun, moon, and stars of the law realm. Back then, Luo Fan had used the method of constructing multi-layered three-dimensional talisman to construct the sun of the law realm. That method was already extremely exquisite back then, and it had brought countless benefits to the law realm. However, now that he had comprehended the mysteries of the rune structure, this structure seemed to be too lacking. Most importantly, it was only the sun. The other stars were not real. This was a fly in the ointment, and it made the law realm seem a little incomplete. Most importantly, it was only the sun. The other stars were not real. It was not perfect. However, this was what he wanted to make up for. It was too wasteful back then. Luo Fan looked at the sun hanging high in the sky and sighed inwardly. He raised his hand and pointed gently, and the entire sky instantly changed. The three-dimensional talisman that formed the sun instantly separated from the shadow of the sun, and the entire sky instantly turned from extremely real to somewhat illusory. It looked exactly the same as when he had not fused the three-dimensional talisman into the sun. It had also become a projection. The three-dimensional talisman that was separated from the sun was clearly visible to Luo Fan, but did not exist in the eyes of the people in the Law Realm. Even outsiders like Wu Daozi's clone could not see the existence of the three-dimensional talisman. After all, Luo Fan was the creator of the Law Realm. He was the master of the Law Realm, so everything in the Law Realm was under his control. Even Wu Daozi's original body would be in a difficult situation if he were to come here with a bronze ruler. Thus, he would naturally be able to take whatever he wanted from the others. It would be extremely easy for him to hide certain things from the masses of the Law Realm. As Luo Fan raised his hand and drew a few strokes, the three-dimensional talisman sphere suddenly collapsed and turned into countless three-dimensional talismans. These three-dimensional talismans were directly divided into 3 parts, each with roughly the same amount of talismans. These 3 parts of the three-dimensional talismans were stacked together in a spherical shape. It was just that there was a huge difference from their previous spherical appearance. They looked like 3 spheres that were piled up by countless grains of sand. Luo Fan looked at the three-dimensional talisman spheres and smiled. He raised his hand and gently waved it in the air. In an instant, the 3 piles of three-dimensional talisman spheres instantly separated. 2 of the piles turned into 99 spherical talisman layers. The last pile turned into 99 flat, three-dimensional talisman layers. The 2 piles of 99 three-dimensional talisman layers were all spherical, empty shells. Each of them was about the size of the sun from before, and when they were spread out, it was extremely majestic. The 99 three-dimensional talisman layers were all extremely huge, and each of them was no smaller than the three-dimensional talisman spheres when spread out. Faced with this scene, Luo Fan raised his hand and continuously drew in the air. As he drew, a pile of 99 three-dimensional talisman layers began to overlap in a strange order and finally turned into a huge three-dimensional talisman sphere. Then, Luo Fan didn't stop, nor did he change the target of his operation. Instead, he continued to sketch in the void, writing one strange text after another. As he wrote the words in the air, the layers of shadows on the overlapping three-dimensional talisman sphere suddenly expanded and shrank. It looked as if there were new layers of spherical, three-dimensional talismans integrated into the three-dimensional talisman sphere. In the process of this change, the three-dimensional talisman sphere gradually began to radiate light, and the essence of the sun and the charm of the true fire of the sun were continuously emitted from it. What Luo Fan was doing now was the same as what he had done outside just now. He was also writing an article for heaven and earth, all living things, space-time, and chaos. However, this article was not about the mysteries of the venerable realm, nor was it about the mysteries of the transcendent realm or the Tao integration realm. Instead, it was about the mysteries of the sun. What was the sun? What was the sunlight? What was the structure of the sun? What were the profound principles behind the structure? What were the special mysteries behind the structure? How did the world view explain the sun? Why did the sun have so many characteristics? Why did it have such endless vitality? Why could it bring so many benefits to all living things? And so on and so forth. An endless stream of words continuously appeared in his hands. In the end, they were arranged in a three-dimensional layer of talismans and continuously integrated into the three-dimensional talisman sphere that appeared in the void. Chapter 1038. This time, the number of words that Luo Fan drew in the void was far less than what he had drawn in the outside world. In just over 2 hours, he had already completed the process of drawing. The number of words he had drawn was naturally far from hundreds of millions. It was only a few million words. These words contained his comprehension of the sun, his understanding of the sun, and his understanding of the mysteries of the sun and the law worldview. When these words fused with the three-dimensional talisman, the spherical three-dimensional talisman turned into a living sun. It hung high in the sky like a real sun, emitting endless light and heat that illuminated the entire world of the law realm. Fortunately, this was the law realm. So although the sun was emitting endless light and heat, it was still completely hidden by Luo Fan. It was still not seen by any living being nor could it be sensed by any living being. It really works. Looking at the three-dimensional talisman in the sky that looked like the sun, Luo Fan could not help but reveal a manly smile on his face. After the text that described the mysteries of the sun was attached to the three-dimensional talisman, everything in the world, including the chaos of time and space, naturally responded to it. The various characteristics that were described were added to it, making the three-dimensional talisman really become like the sun that was described, possessing all the characteristics and mysteries of the sun. Such a mysterious method was obviously not limited to this place. It instantly gave Luo Fan a burst of inspiration, and countless special methods began to be born in an endless stream. After thinking for a while, Luo Fan had an idea. He raised his hand and pointed at the other 99 spherical three-dimensional talismans in the void. The 99 three-dimensional talismans began to overlap in an extremely complicated order. Finally, they overlapped into a three-dimensional talisman. Then he began to draw strange characters in the void. This time, the words he drew were not describing the mysteries of the sun. The words he drew this time were describing the mysteries of the moon. It was describing everything that he had comprehended and understood about the moon in the law worldview. After these words appeared, the three-dimensional spherical talisman on the three-dimensional talisman began to shine continuously. Outside the three-dimensional talisman sphere, faint lunar essence began to spread. The entire three-dimensional talisman. Gradually, it gave off the feeling of a moon. It looked more and more like a moon. This process of drawing words in the air lasted for another 2 hours. 2 hours later, the words that Luo Fan had drawn in the void appeared. However, there were already millions of them. It was a three-dimensional seal. It had completely transformed into a real moon, and when placed together with the three-dimensional talisman from before, it was like a sun and a moon were placed together. Seeing this, Luo Fan did not hesitate. He raised his hand and pointed at the two three-dimensional talisman spheres. The two spheres instantly shook, and one of them fused with the sun. Then, along with the shadow of the sun in the sky, it began to integrate into the star circulation system of this world. As for the other, it had fused with the invisible moon beneath the ground and was also incorporated into the star system of the law realm. When this happened, the entire law realm shook slightly. In an instant, an inexplicable change occurred. It seemed like the entire law realm had become more stable, and the circulation of the laws within it had become smoother. Some of the obstacles that had existed in the past had disappeared in an instant. Many cultivators in the law realm sensed the inexplicable change in the world at the same time. They sensed that the difficulty of comprehending the Tao and cultivating seemed to have decreased significantly. In an instant, many cultivators even broke through their bottlenecks. The entire law realm was suddenly filled with an inexplicable aura. The appearance of this aura made Luo Fan smile instantly. This aura was one that he had been looking forward to immensely. It meant that this law realm could no longer accommodate peak connate grand Luo existences like before. Now, it could accommodate existences that had just become quasi-saints. In other words, from now on, peak connate grand Luo was no longer the limit of cultivation in this law realm. Peak connate grand Luo was now the new limit of the law realm. Although this was only a slight increase in the realm limit, its significance to the law realm was already completely different. That was because this meant that the law realm was taking another step forward on the path to surpassing the vast thousand worlds and becoming a perfect world. The vast thousand worlds could only accommodate connate grand Luo cultivators. On the other hand, a perfect world could accommodate the cultivation of sages. Although it couldn't accommodate them limitlessly, it could still accommodate them and appear. When a vast thousand worlds could begin to give birth to cultivators that surpassed connate grand Luo cultivators, it meant that the vast thousand worlds had begun to surpass its own limits and had begun to move towards a higher level of heaven and earth. In other words, it had taken a small step towards becoming a perfect world. If a world created according to the law worldview could surpass the vast thousand worlds and advance toward a perfect world, it meant that the law worldview was truly moving towards a world that could support Luo Fan's ascension to sage. This meant that his chances of becoming a sage had increased. How could Luo Fan not be excited about this? How could he not be happy? Luo Fan smiled faintly as he carefully sensed the various changes in the law worldview. The law worldview in his mind and consciousness began to change slightly. This change allowed the law worldview to become more and more complete, allowing it to delve deeper into the essence of heaven and earth and the essence of chaos. After a while, Luo Fan finally stopped this process. He raised his hand and pointed at the void. In an instant, the 99 layers of three-dimensional talismans that seemed to be flat began to overlap layer by layer, according to some complicated pattern. The 99 flat layers of three-dimensional runes directly became one layer. When this change occurred, he didn't stop at all. He raised his hand and continuously sketched in the void, drawing out strange characters one after another. As these characters were sketched out, the flat layer of three-dimensional runes began to flicker, expand, shrink, expand, shrink. This time, the characters that Luo Fan sketched out did not describe anything else but a sky full of stars. The mysteries of the entire starry sky. These were the mysteries of the starry sky that he had personally comprehended and understood. The mysteries of the starry sky explained by the law worldview. The sky full of stars was vast and boundless. It was very mysterious, although any of the stars was much weaker than the sun and the moon. However, the starry sky formed by the stars in the sky contained more mysteries than the sun alone. The moon alone was many times more mysterious. This time, the process of Luo Fan sketching out the characters did not last for 2 hours or even 10 days and 10 nights. Instead, it lasted for more than half a year before he stopped. In this half a year, the number of characters that Luo Fan had sketched out was hundreds of billions. This number of characters was hundreds of times more than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm that he had sketched out previously. Such a number of characters, of course, did not mean that the mysteries of the starry sky were more profound and mysterious than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. It only meant that the mysteries of the starry sky were hundreds of times more complicated than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. It should be known that the number of stars in the sky was almost endless. Under such circumstances, the mysteries contained in the starry sky were only hundreds of times more complicated than the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm. Such a gap showed how profound the mysteries of the Tao Master Realm were. Among the hundreds of billions of characters that Luo Fan sketched out, almost all the characteristics of the stars in the starry sky were described. The stars he described were not described according to the infinite stars and galaxies in the Earth's universe. Instead, they were described according to his understanding of the characteristics of the many stars that a normal world with an orbicular sky and a rectangular Earth must have. The number of worlds that Luo Fan had opened up had reached a level that ordinary people could not imagine. Under such circumstances, he naturally had a deep understanding of what a starry sky that could perfectly support the stable and eternal existence of a normal world should look like. How many stars were there? What kind of characteristics did each star have? What kind of mysteries did each star have? What kind of relationship did they have with each other? All these kinds of questions were in his mind, and there was not the slightest bit of ambiguity in them. It was precisely because of this that he was able to do something that was almost heaven-defying. In half a year, with the help of hundreds of billions of characters, he had described the mysteries of the entire starry sky clearly and clearly, without leaving anything out. As Luo Fan sketched for half a year, the three-dimensional layer of the talisman started to expand continuously. Its surface also started to turn pitch black, and bright stars started to appear within it one by one, decorating the increasingly vast void. More and more dense star essence was continuously emitted from the three-dimensional layer of the talisman, gradually filling the entire world of the law realm. Therefore, although Luo Fan had completely concealed the existence of the three-dimensional talisman during this half a year, the living beings in the law realm could not see the strange starry sky taking shape. However, they could still sense that the law realm was constantly changing and the density of the star essence was slowly increasing. Moreover, the originally somewhat illusory star essence was becoming more and more real during this process. In fact, more and more cultivation methods related to the stars were being created. After half a year, Luo Fan sketched out the last character and fused it with the three-dimensional layer of the talisman. In an instant, the three-dimensional layer of the talisman suddenly expanded infinitely. The billions of stars and the boundless void started to gradually overlap with the starry sky of the Law Realm and fuse with it. Finally, after a few breaths, when all the changes calmed down, the flat layer of the three-dimensional layer of the talisman had turned into a boundless starry sky. The pitch-black void was dotted with stars that emitted dense star essence. Looking up from the ground, the clear and deep starry sky made people involuntarily feel a kind of reverence, feeling a kind of boundless vastness. When the starry sky returned to its original position, the entire Law Realm once again underwent an inexplicable change. The various aspects of the Law Realm received some sort of upgrade. However, this upgrade didn't result in any qualitative changes. It didn't allow the cultivators in the Law Realm to break through the early stage of the Quasi-Saint Realm. Instead, they remained at the peak of the early stage of the Quasi-Saint Realm. However, this change reduced the difficulty of cultivating in the Law Realm by a lot. The bottlenecks and shackles that cultivators had to face in their cultivation were reduced by a lot. Luo Fan wasn't disappointed when he saw this. He was already satisfied to be able to produce such a change in the Law Realm through this method. Whether or not the Law Realm could truly reach its peak in the future and allow him to become a sage would depend on his continuous cultivation. He could only pin his hopes on some minor techniques that he occasionally comprehended. That was simply unrealistic. With that thought in mind, he raised his hand and pressed it down. In an instant, the image that he had left in the Law Realm, as well as the existence of that image, the space-time maze around the mountain disappeared in an instant. From then on, the mountain would become a relatively good cultivation treasure land. However, it would no longer be the cultivation holy land it used to be. At this moment, the Law Realm had basically matured, and the cultivation world within it was already self-sufficient. At this moment, the Law Realm had basically matured, and the cultivation world within it could already be self-sufficient. Even if the civilization was destroyed in the future, the civilization that was born would naturally develop a cultivation civilization that conformed to the Law Realm's worldview due to the fundamental nature of the Law Realm. There would no longer be a need for him to leave behind an image to guide the cultivation world of the Law Realm. As such, there was no need for him to leave an image in the Law Realm. Moreover, leaving behind a cultivation holy land would be akin to pulling up seedlings to help them grow. Hence, it was better to just eliminate it directly. It was precisely because of this that he decided to do this. After doing all this, Luo Fan didn't disturb any of the living beings in the Law Realm. He lifted his foot and took a step forward, arriving outside the Law Realm. He arrived at the three-dimensional talisman that was emitting boundless brilliance and piercing through the endless gray mist. Looking at the boundless brilliance emitted by the three-dimensional talisman, Luo Fan casually pointed at it. The boundless brilliance instantly retracted and directly connected with the sun, moon, and stars within the three-dimensional talisman. It provided a huge amount of power to the three-dimensional talismans as a whole, making the three-dimensional talismans as a whole more stable. The entire three-dimensional talisman seemed to have become obscure, and no light could be seen from it anymore. It looked like an ordinary sphere, and it seemed so inconspicuous among the boundless grayness. After doing all of this, Luo Fan took a step forward and directly arrived on the surface of the 3D seal. He sat down on the 3D seal, and with a thought, all of his senses and thoughts connected to the avatar that was fighting against Wu Dao Zi, Master Ashenwood, and Master Do Quanzi billions of years ago. It was the avatar that seemed to be fighting endlessly against Wu Dao Zi, Master Ashenwood, and Master Do Quanzi. His main body and the clone were in two completely different time dimensions. Although more than half a year had passed for his main body, only a few days had passed for the clone. To be more precise, the The clone that Luo Fan's main body was contacting at this time was a few days after he had obtained the comprehension of the Dao Master Realm from the clone. In other words, it happened to be when the clone was protected by the three-dimensional rune sphere, resisting the erosion of the surrounding matrix spacetime. When the connection was established, Luo Fan's main body instantly poured countless insights into the mind of the clone through this mysterious connection. I see. In an instant, Luo Fan's clone came to a sudden realization and a happy smile appeared on his face. The relationship between Luo Fan's main body and his clone had always been one of mutual promotion. The main body obtained the comprehension of the realm breakthrough from the clone, and the clone obtained the usage of the higher realm from the main body. The relationship between them had always been like this since a long time ago. At this moment, there was no exception. After an unknown number of trillions of years, Luo Fan's original body obtained a breakthrough to the Dao Master Realm from this doppelganger through the strange characteristics of the gap between the heaven and earth and the state of chaos, and thus became a Dao Master. After that, according to the mysteries of the Dao Master Realm and the experiences of his doppelganger, Luo Fan's doppelganger gained a deeper understanding of the use of the multi-layered talisman. In turn, through the mysterious connection between his doppelganger and his doppelganger, Luo Fan's doppelganger gained the same understanding and the same means. At this time, Luo Fan's clone showed a faint expression on his face. He raised his hand and gently touched the three-dimensional talisman composed of gray existences around his body. In an instant, countless gray, strange existences began to emerge on the three-dimensional talisman. Then, Luo Fan used the bright red, jade-like big axe in his hand and began to continuously chop these strange gray existences. After a while, the gray existences turned into 99 spherical, three-dimensional talisman layers. These 99 spherical, three-dimensional talisman layers were not small. Each of them seemed to be about the same size as the three-dimensional talisman surrounding him. However, 99 three-dimensional talisman layers appeared around him at this time, appearing inside the spherical, three-dimensional talisman. It did not seem to be crowded at all. The mystery and strangeness was unimaginable. Seeing the 99 three-dimensional talisman balls appear, Luo Fan continuously sketched them in the void. Strange characters appeared one after another as he sketched. The 99 three-dimensional talisman layers began to overlap in an inexplicable order as he sketched. The changes that had occurred 3 times in the later Dharma ending age appeared again at this time. Chapter 1039. As Luo Fan continued to outline the strange characters, the grayish three-dimensional talisman gradually changed its appearance, becoming more and more illusory and almost invisible. Finally, after an hour, when Luo Fan outlined the last character, the three-dimensional talisman had completely disappeared, as if it had never been there. Not only could it be seen with one's eyes, but it was also difficult to perceive its existence. After doing all this, Luo Fan let out a long breath. With a wave of his hand, the grayish three-dimensional talisman that had originally existed around him and completely isolated him from the matrix space-time collapsed in an instant and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. The moment the three-dimensional talisman disappeared, the surrounding rectangular space-time suddenly shook. It was like a reservoir that had lost its dam as it rushed toward Luo Fan crazily. Judging from its momentum, it seemed like it wanted to crush Luo Fan into powder. However, when the matrix space-time came within a few inches of Luo Fan's body, it seemed to have encountered a completely unshakable dam. No matter how it rushed and hit, it could not go any further. This allowed Luo Fan to hover in the matrix space-time, surrounded by a thin barrier that was several inches thick, which isolated him from being eroded and harmed by the matrix space-time. Compared to the previous situation where he was completely protected by the three-dimensional talisman, unable to move and could only protect himself, this method was already many times better. At this time, he had almost completely regained his freedom. For him, the surrounding matrix spacetime no longer had any protection. Standing there was no difference from standing there with nothing. He could still fight and harm the cultivators in the matrix spacetime. At this moment, Wu Daozi and Mad Do were both shocked and turned their eyes to where Luo Fan was. Impossible? How could he resist it? Wu Daozi was in disbelief. The magic treasure in his hand was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the sage-to-be level. The power of such a magic treasure was earth-shattering. It was not something that an ordinary peak quasi-sage could withstand. Moreover, at this moment, he had already unleashed the power of this magic treasure to the second realm. That power was many times stronger than the normal power of this magic treasure. As such, unless one had a magic treasure of the same level, and a magic treasure's power had also reached the second level, then one would be able to withstand it. Ordinary cultivators would not be able to withstand it, even pinnacle quasi-sages. For a magic treasure like this, it was only a matter of a single move. There was no way he could block it. Previously, the fact that Luo Fan was able to use the grayish existence to construct a three-dimensional talisman to resist the attack of this magic treasure had already surprised him. Countless thoughts appeared in his mind. At this moment, Luo Fan was actually able to block all the attacks from this magic treasure so easily. It seemed like none of the attacks from this magic treasure could get close to his body or shake his body. How could he understand this change? Naturally, he found it unbelievable and unimaginable. At this moment, Luo Fan was very comfortable. He floated in the rectangular space-time and stretched out his hand to grab a square in the space-time. He carefully sensed the countless mysterious information coming from the square, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. Sure enough, the power has increased greatly. I should have thought of this. I didn't expect that I would need my body to remind me. I'm really ashamed. Such a thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind. The words he had just outlined formed an article. It was not an article about the sun, moon, stars, or the realm of Tao Master, but an article about absolute defense. He had included all the attack and defense methods he knew, including all his divine senses, all the damage he could cause, including the light emitted by the branch in Ashen Musi's hand, the rectangular space-time, and the attack of the bronze ruler. All the damage he knew were included in it. After the grayish three-dimensional talisman received the words written by Luo Fan, it naturally had some mysterious connection with heaven and earth, all things, time, space, and even the state of chaos. Naturally, it was attached with all kinds of incredible power. Although the defensive power was not as strong as described in the article by Luo Fan, it was still extremely amazing. At least it could exert the power of the grayish existence to a great extent, thus completely isolating him from the erosion of the surrounding space-time. It was directly invisible, making him move freely in the rectangular space-time as if nothing had happened. Fighting Spirit Do looked at Luo Fan, his eyes flashing with an increasingly strong fighting intent. I didn't expect that the way you cultivate is actually similar to my way of fighting. I didn't expect that you could make such great progress in a fight. It seems that I really came to the right place this time. Madman Do said. His imposing aura was getting stronger and stronger. This imposing aura directly targeted Luo Fan and fiercely pressed down on him. It seemed as if Luo Fan would be directly crushed into powder. Facing such a chi power, Luo Fan did not care at all. The damage caused by the chi power was the most common. Naturally, he had already considered it before and had added the damage caused by this chi power within the protection range of the three-dimensional talisman. If the strength of this chi power could reach the level of a sage, or even be enough to destroy the world and open up the world in the chaos, then he would naturally not be able to resist it. However, no matter how strong Fighting Spirit Do was, he was only at the pinnacle of a quasi-sage. Luo Fan's protection could even completely resist the power of the second layer of a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of a quasi-sage. How could this chi power have any effect on the protection? At this moment, Luo Fan did not feel much under the pressure of this chi power, nor was he hurt by it. Sensing the incomparably safe protection around him, Luo Fan smiled and pointed at the three-dimensional talisman where Ashen Musi was. In an instant, the three-dimensional talisman collapsed with a loud bang and turned into 99 spherical talisman layers in the void, which suddenly overlapped with each other. Then, they suddenly overlapped and wrapped around the boundless multicolored light that had just appeared. Then, the 99 overlapping three-dimensional rune spheres began to flicker constantly. One after another, the three-dimensional talisman shadows expanded and contracted again. It was as if an endless number of three-dimensional talismans had appeared out of thin air and started to merge with the three-dimensional talisman spheres. The method Luo Fan used was, of course, exactly the same as the method he used to construct his defense. However, he did not use his hands to draw words out of thin air like before. Instead, he directly drew the words in his mind. Then, the words that were drawn in his mind were constantly integrated into the three-dimensional rune sphere through the changing order of the three-dimensional rune layer. In such a way, his speed was much faster than before. However, it consumed even more mental and physical effort. With the appearance of this change, the three-dimensional talisman gradually became transparent. Even its entire form gradually became illusory. It was the color of the multicolored light that was wrapped by the three-dimensional talisman. It began to leak out from within. Everyone could clearly see that within the multicolored light. Master Ashenmu opened his eyes and looked around in confusion. However, at that moment, the ruler spacetime suddenly began to collide with the light. He and the multicolored light began to fight, as if they were mortal enemies. The matrix spacetime itself was the second attack of the bronze ruler in Wu Daozi's hand. The multicolored light around Master Ashenmu was also the second attack of a magic treasure of the same level. The two were of the same level, so neither could suppress the other. The confrontation between the multicolored light and the matrix spacetime became more and more intense. At the place where the two clashed, countless small worlds were born and destroyed. The multicolored light was occasionally compressed by the ruler spacetime, but it would immediately counterattack in another direction, forcing the matrix spacetime to retreat. However, no matter how much it shrank and retreated, the ruler spacetime could press into the original location of the three-dimensional talisman, but the multicolored light could not press into that location. It was as if the three-dimensional talisman had become a one-way seal. The outside could enter, but the inside could not. Not good. Seeing this, Wu Daozi couldn't help but frown. He knew that Luo Fan was using his power to deal with Master Ashenmu. After letting out a cry, he raised his hand and gently shook the bronze ruler. The huge human shadow above the bronze ruler turned the ruler in its hand. The ruler spacetime suddenly shrank and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. In the end, only the huge human shadow was left floating above the bronze ruler. The entire spacetime looked completely normal. In the past, once the ruler spacetime was used, it was almost invincible. No matter how strong the opponent was, as long as they didn't have a treasure of the same level, they wouldn't be able to resist it. Once it was used, it would be able to take over the opponent. This was also the reason why Wu Daozi was so confident in the ruler spacetime. However, at this time, the people he was facing either had magic treasures of the same level or special spells. Even the weakest Luo Fan had a strange defense that could protect himself and resist the erosion of the ruler spacetime. Under such circumstances, the ruler spacetime was useless. Not only could it not deal with the opponent, but it would also be used by the opponent to deal with their own companions. Since that was the case, there was no need to use the ruler spacetime. Not only would it be a waste of his own power, but it would also be used by the opponent to increase his chances of failure. It was because of this consideration that Wu Daozi put away the ruler spacetime at this time. At this time, Luo Fan was still constantly sketching strange words in his mind. He was writing a mysterious article that was constantly integrated into the three-dimensional talisman that wrapped around Song Musi, making the three-dimensional talisman more and more invisible, and its power became more and more powerful. Although the ruler spacetime was no longer used by him, and no longer helped him to attack the light released by the magic treasure in Song Musi's hand, Song Musi didn't feel much better. At this moment, he suddenly felt that he was constantly being attacked by an invisible existence. This invisible existence was extremely terrifying. Every attack seemed to hit the insignificant weakness of the light around him. Every attack was enough to shake the foundation of the existence of the light. Every attack was transmitted through the light to his body, making him feel that his whole body was constantly shaking with the attack. Every small injury was constantly accumulating in his body. It seemed that it was about to accumulate to the point where it couldn't be suppressed and completely burst out. Could it be that this person is really like a fighting madman? The more he fights, the more powerful he becomes? He didn't have such a method before. How could he have such an amazing method now? Song Musi thought, while trying to resist the invisible attacks around him. At this moment, although he could see the outside world through the light, his perception couldn't perceive the outside world at all. In his perception, he still seemed to exist in the boundless gray. There was no change at all from the previous form of existence. The article that Luo Fan had added to the three-dimensional talisman. It was none other than an article that described the mystery of the light and described how to deal with it. Luo Fan had already seen this multicolored light twice in the past few days. In the past few days, the light was constantly fighting with the three-dimensional talisman he had constructed. He didn't know how many times they had clashed with each other. However, he had already gradually understood the various properties of the light. This also gave him some insight into the mystery of the light and how to deal with it. He was able to turn it into an article. He had written for all living things in the world, for the chaos of time and space to see, for them to give his 3D talisman the ability to deal with these mysteries and attacks. That way, the 3D talisman could easily deal with a multicolored light and make Master Ashen would feel so uncomfortable and uncomfortable. Fortunately, I thought of how to use that existence to construct a three-dimensional talisman. Otherwise, even if I added these words, I'm afraid it wouldn't have much effect. Luo Fan thought at this moment. Although the text attached to the three-dimensional talisman was an important reason why the three-dimensional talisman could display such power. The most fundamental reason was the material that made up the three-dimensional talisman. It was precisely because the material that made up the three-dimensional talisman was the grayish existence that came from the gap between heaven and earth and the chaotic space. This allowed the three-dimensional talisman to have an effect on the power displayed by Song Musi's magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the quasi-sage level. If he didn't use that grayish existence and instead used the magic power in Luo Fan's body to construct the three-dimensional talisman, the effect would definitely be greatly reduced. Not to mention turning the three-dimensional talisman into a sharp weapon to deal with the light, it might even be directly broken and turned into nothingness the moment it collided with the light. The article attached to the three-dimensional talisman for all living things in this world and the chaotic space to see was, after all, only a mystery. The thing that really displayed these mysteries was the three-dimensional talisman itself. If the material was insufficient, it would be like using tofu to make a robot. No matter how perfect one's design was, no matter how detailed each part was, or even if one designed a real artificial intelligence, once it was moved, it would definitely fall apart and not be able to take shape. The speed of using one's mind to draw the words was much faster than using one's bare hands. Originally, it would have taken Luo Fan more than an hour to draw the words, but at this moment, it only took him a few dozen breaths to completely draw all the words and imprint them on the three-dimensional talisman. The three-dimensional talisman became invisible and enveloped Song Musi like an invisible chi shield. The light around Song Musi took on the shape of a ball and was unable to break through the obstruction of the chi shield. Instead, it was constantly suppressed by the chi shield, causing countless strange shapes to appear. It looked like a balloon that could explode at any time. Song Musi frowned and felt that things had really become troublesome. Previously, when he sensed the grayish existence around him, he was able to comprehend the grayish existence. In the end, after countless billions of years, he completely comprehended the mysteries of the grayish existence and broke free. Although this took an extremely long time, it was extremely shocking. After all, there was still hope. It was not enough to make him despair. There was a way out, so he was not very anxious. However, at this moment, He could not see the grayish existence around him at all, let alone comprehend the mysteries within it. How could he still use the previous method to escape? This was simply his last path of retreat, and it had completely wiped out the last bit of hope that existed within him. This matter was naturally much more troublesome than before. So how could he not be moved? Song Musy frowned, and the branch in his hand scattered even more light. It constantly condensed into various strange shapes within the chi shield and frantically collided with it. However, the result was very disappointing. The energy barrier wasn't affected at all. No matter how the multicolored light collided, the three-dimensional talisman didn't move at all. It even attacked another location according to the imbalance caused by the multicolored light, causing the multicolored light to become even larger. During this entire process, Luo Fan did not exert any control at all. It was completely the three-dimensional talisman's reaction. Just this reaction was enough for Tsang Muzi to struggle with. This was enough to show how mysterious the three-dimensional talisman was, and it was enough to show how much progress Luo Fan had made after obtaining the comprehension of his main body. Chapter 1040. There were 7 great saints on earth. They were the primeval Lord of Heaven, the Taishang Ancestor, the Tongtian Ancestor, the Primordial Ancestor, the Monster Ancestor, the Amitabha Buddha, and the Ancestor of the human race, Empress Hua. They were teachers and friends, but at the same time, they were also competitors. Ashen Muzi was the disciple of the Taishang Ancestor, while Wu Daozi was the disciple of the Monster Ancestor. No one knew whose disciple Madman Do was, but he had to be the disciple of a saint. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared treat Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi this way. Millions of years ago, Shun Dao had met a woman called Yu Shensi. She claimed to be Empress Hua's maid, but her true identity was Empress Hua's disciple. In the tens of millions of years since Luo Fan had come to this universe before it shattered and became Earth, he'd seen as many as 4 disciples of a saint. In the eyes of the other living beings in the world, this kind of opportunity was already a great opportunity, a great blessing. Tsang Muzi was a disciple of the Taishang Taoist ancestor. The mystiques bestowed upon him by the Taishang Taoist ancestor were so powerful that they reached an unimaginable level. Coupled with his own cultivation level, he was at the peak of the quasi-sage realm. The magic treasure in his hand was a powerful magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle quasi-sage level. If he had unleashed all of his magical abilities and displayed his strongest attack during the battle with Luo Fan, even if he couldn't have subdued Luo Fan in an instant, he certainly wouldn't have been in such a difficult situation at this time. This was evident from Wu Daozi. His combat arts weren't as strong as Ashen Muzi's, but the latter was completely sealed. Wu Daozi, on the other hand, was facing off against Luo Fan outside. The difference between the two was huge. It was obvious. Luo Fan stood there, a calm expression on his face, his heart filled with an indescribable joy. His current performance meant that he was strong enough to subdue the disciple of a peak demi-sage saint. This meant that his combat arts had reached the peak of this world, second only to saints. How could he not feel happy about such a fact? Wonderful. You've gained an absolute advantage now. That way, I won't have to help you anymore. A voice filled with indescribable excitement and fighting spirit entered Luo Fan's ears. It woke him up from that inexplicable joy. As soon as he heard this voice, he knew exactly where it came from. This voice was clearly from Mad Do. Turning his head, he saw that Do Kuangzi and Wu Daozi were already standing together. There was no longer any confrontation between them, and the two of them were looking at Luo Fan. Among them, Madman Do's eyes were burning with the flames of war. Wu Daozi's eyes were burning with rage. No wonder you didn't make a move just now. So it was because of this. Luo Fan sighed. He finally understood why Madman Do didn't seize the opportunity when he was transforming the 3D talisman to completely seal Master Ashen Muzi to deal with him. It turned out that Madman Do had deliberately allowed Luo Fan to completely subdue Master Ashen Muzi so that Luo Fan could completely win the battle, so that Madman Do could deal with Luo Fan without violating his principles. At this moment, Madman Do didn't allow Luo Fan to continue thinking. His body shook, and the long staff in his hand trembled slightly. In an instant, it tore through the void and directly blasted towards Luo Fan's head. That speed, that momentum, it was almost as if it wanted to completely destroy the world. As the long staff approached, Luo Fan felt as if the entire world was wrapped in it. All of its power was added to the long staff and poured towards him, as if it wanted to completely destroy him. Facing such a long staff, Luo Fan raised his hand and grabbed. Countless complex and mysterious 3D talismans suddenly flashed on the bright red axe in his hand. These 3D talismans were directly in the shape of the bright red axe, layer by layer, as if countless bright red axes were constantly merging into it. In the blink of an eye, the entire bright red axe had completely changed. At first glance, it seemed to be a bright red axe. However, if one observed it carefully, they would find that it was not a bright red axe at all. It was clearly the product of countless worlds, countless universes, and countless space-time fusing together. The whole bright red axe shook slightly, and countless worlds and countless space-time were shaking. The bright red axe was facing him, and it was as if countless worlds and countless space-time were crushing him. Such a feeling, such a change, was completely different from before. Its power had increased by more than 1,000 times. The change of this bright red axe was the method that Luo Fan had just comprehended. He had integrated the article written about the chaos of time and space into it, so that the heaven and earth, all living things, space-time, and chaos could add their power to it, thus giving the bright red axe a power that it didn't have before. The article that Luo Fan had integrated into the bright red axe was none other than the article that described the mysteries of the time's trend. This article contained the mysteries of the reincarnation of thousands of eras that he had seen on the road of transcendence, the mysteries of the trend of the times that he had seen in the sage's imprint, and the principles of the trend of the times that he had seen through his body in the untainted land, his body in the Earth universe, and his doppelgangers in the Tianyuan Great World after comparing each other. All of this was completely integrated into an article of hundreds of thousands of words, which was integrated into the giant axe. As a result, the giant axe took on such an incredible form and possessed power that was many times stronger than before. After the giant axe took shape, Luo Fan gently lifted it. In an instant, the giant axe directly traversed time and space, arriving in front of Crazy Do's head even though it was launched later. However, he didn't seem to care about the long rod that was heading towards his head. However, this wasn't because he wanted to perish together with Crazy Do, but because he had absolute confidence that when he chopped off Crazy Do's head, Crazy Do's long rod definitely wouldn't be able to touch his head. The mystique that Crazy Do had used was a battle mystique that had been passed down by the sage. This mystique had endless power. The higher one's fighting spirit was, the more powerful it would be. At that moment, Luo Fan's power had ignited an unprecedented fighting spirit. The power of this mystique had naturally reached an unprecedented level. However, under such circumstances, just as his long rod was about to hit his opponent's head, his opponent's large axe actually arrived first, even though it had been launched later. This change was truly out of his expectations, and he almost couldn't react in time. However, he had rich combat experience after all. His mystique was boundless. At this critical moment, the long rod in his hand slightly shook and turned, bypassing a mysterious trajectory. It was as if his original goal was what he wanted to do, directly blocking the long rod between his head and the bright red giant axe, allowing the giant axe to directly hit the long rod. In an instant, an unimaginable power was transmitted directly from the bright red giant axe, making Crazy Do feel as if his long rod was supporting countless worlds. Originally, it wouldn't even waver in the face of a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. It seemed as if it would never suffer any damage, but now, it actually felt like it couldn't hold on. It was making cracking sounds, as if it could completely collapse at any time. At this moment, Crazy Do felt that failure was so close to him for the first time. The fighting spirit in his eyes skyrocketed 1,000 times in an instant. This was what he wanted. Since he reached the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level hundreds of millions of years ago, he had completely forgotten what it felt like to be defeated. He had completely forgotten what it felt like to be defeated. Because of this, his cultivation realm couldn't be improved for a long time. He couldn't really enjoy the joy of fighting, couldn't understand the true meaning of fighting, and couldn't understand the true meaning of fighting. He couldn't understand the true mystery of the great Tao. Because of this, he became the crazy doe that he was now. That was why he would desperately pursue fighting without caring about right or wrong. He even wanted to fight forever, until the end of time, until the end of the world, until the end of the world. He wanted to fight forever. What he wanted was to feel the taste of failure. How could it be called a fight if there was only victory and no defeat? Only with victory and defeat could one truly understand what fighting was, and only then could one feel the joy and sorrow, pain and joy of fighting. Only then could one truly understand the true meaning of fighting and understand the true mystery of fighting. Feeling this feeling of near failure, Crazy Doe's heart trembled. It wasn't fear but excitement. His fighting spirit soared because of this excitement. Good. He let out a loud roar. Suddenly, a golden light burst forth from his body. Under this golden light, Mad Doe's figure seemed to have become taller. The long staff in his hand also seemed to have undergone some inexplicable changes. It seemed to have become more powerful, more solid, and more terrifying. An indescribable force suddenly erupted from the long staff and collided with the bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand. In an instant, the entire world seemed to be shaking along with it. This time, it wasn't just the living beings on the Chelan cliff, but all the living beings in the world heard the rumbling thunder in the sky. In an instant, countless cultivators cast their gazes toward the sky. Some powerful peak quasi-sages even cast their gazes in the direction of Chelan Cliff and saw the battle between Luo Fan and Do Guangzi at that location. In a strange palace hidden in a mysterious place between the heavens and the earth, a woman was commanding many other women to clean up a vegetable field. Suddenly, the woman raised her eyebrows and looked into the void. Her eyes seemed to pierce through the endless barriers of time and space, and she saw a scene that was very far away, or perhaps it should be said that it was countless space-times away. I didn't expect such an interesting thing to happen there. It seems that I have another excuse to go out. The woman smiled and thought to herself. This woman was none other than Rain Shensi, whom Luo Fan had met once before. This palace was naturally Empress Nvua's Taoist right site, Empress Nvua's palace. After thinking about it, Rain Shensi ordered, "You guys carefully remove the weeds in this area. I have to go out for a while, so don't be lazy. If you're weak, I'll come back to check. Don't regret it." The women responded solemnly, not daring to be careless. Seeing this, Rain Shensi smiled and took a step forward. Her figure turned into a rainbow and directly rushed out of Empress Nvua's palace, heading toward a certain place in the void. "You have your day too. Crazy Doe, let's see how you die today." The moment she rushed out of Empress Nvua's palace, a thought flashed across her mind. Along the way, a ray of Buddhist light also rushed out from somewhere in the void, advancing toward the same destination as her. "Hey, isn't that Senior Brother Divine Zen Master? Why are you free to leave the blissful Taoist right today?" Rain Shensi shouted when she saw the ray of Buddhist light. The ray of Buddhist light paused for a moment, then stopped in the void and turned into a monk in a gray-white frock. The monk was sitting cross-legged in the void, holding a golden lotus flower. She was holding a golden lotus as she bowed towards Rain Shensi and said, "So, it's Junior Marshall's sister, Rain Shensi. Junior sister, where are you going instead of cultivating in Empress Nvua's palace?" Rain Shensi giggled and turned into Divine Zen Master. She bowed and said, "Today, Junior Brother Crazy Doe has a chance to make a breakthrough. How could I not lend him a hand?" The God Zen Master's appearance was ordinary. His skin was burnt yellow, but his eyes were extremely deep and clear, like two deep and pitch-black universes, able to reflect everything. He could see through everything. He smiled and said, "I see. I'm also going to help Junior Brother Do Guangzi. Since Junior's sister has the same goal as me, why don't we go together? As he spoke, a faint smile flickered in his eyes. The smile made Rain Shensi giggle and nod. That's how it should be. Senior brother, please. Divine Zen Master smiled and nodded. Nodding his head, he moved his body and turned into a ray of Buddhist light, charging toward a certain spot in the void. Rain Shensi also smiled and turned into a ray of light, following behind Divine Zen Master. Not long after, another strange ray of light flashed across the void. The light was faintly discernible and was extremely fast. Is that Junior Sister Wu Weizi? Rain Shensi was surprised when he saw the ray of light. He greeted, "So if it's Senior Sister Rain Shensi, what a coincidence. Senior Sister, where are you going instead of cultivating in Empress Nvoi's palace?" A voice came from the ray of light. The voice was crisp and pleasant, making people feel refreshed as if they were bathing in a clear spring. When Rain Shensi and Divine Zen Master showed themselves, the ray of light paused and revealed a woman. The woman looked petite and delicate, but her eyes were murderous at the moment, as if she was going to deal with someone. "Greetings, Senior Brother Divine Zen Master." Wu Weizi was surprised when she saw Divine Zen Master and quickly bowed. "Junior Sister, you're too polite. Looking at you, it seems like you're going to help Junior Brother Do Quangzi." Divine Zen Master smiled when he saw Wu Weizi's reaction. That's right. Wu Weizi wore a smile that was close to clenching her teeth. "That's great. We're going to help Junior Brother Do Quangzi too. Let's not waste any more time and go quickly. I'm afraid Junior Brother Do Quangzi's chance of breaking through will disappear." Rain Shensi smiled when he heard this. That's right. Wu Weizi's eyes were filled with anxiety. He nodded and excused himself before turning into a faintly discernible ray of light and continued on his way. Looks like Junior Brother Do Quangzi does have a wide circle of friends. Divine Zen Master shook his head and sighed when he saw Wu Weizi's anxious expression. His words seemed to be praising Crazy Z, but one could hear a hint of schadenfreude in his tone. "Senior brother, gloating isn't something a Buddhist disciple would do." Rain Shensi couldn't help but chuckle when he saw Divine Zen Master's sanctimonious expression. I've sinned." Divine Zen Master placed his palms together and lowered his head. He then raised his head and said, "However, we are doing this for the good of Junior Brother Do Quangzi. We aren't gloating. Senior brother, if you continue to waste time here, you'll really miss this rare opportunity." Rain Shensi smiled. Divine Zen Master smiled. He turned into a Buddhist light and began moving forward at a faster speed than before. Rain Shensi shook his head and turned into a rainbow that followed behind the Buddhist light. He was also moving forward at a faster speed than before. Though the world was vast and boundless, it wasn't too far for them who were at the peak of the quasi-sage level. Very quickly, the two of them broke through the barriers of time and space and arrived at a mysterious place in the world. They arrived above the Qilin Cliff. At this moment, aside from Luo Fan, Wu Dao Zi, Master Ashenmu, and Do Quangzi, there were two other people on the Qilin Cliff. One of them was the petite and cute girl, Wu Weizi. At this moment, Wu Weizi was floating in the air, looking at Do Quangzi, who was engaged in an intense battle with Luo Fan. Beside Wu Weizi, there was a young man who was floating on a cloud. The young man was tall and wore a Taoist robe. He looked extremely elegant and natural. There was a faint aura around him, as if he was one with heaven and earth. "Greetings, Senior Brother Fu Detsi." Seeing the young man's appearance, the God Zen Master and the Rain Shensi immediately showed themselves and bowed towards the young man as they greeted him. "So, it's Junior Brother Divine Zen Master and Junior Sister Rain Shensi. Are you two here to help Junior Brother Do Quangzi break through?" The young man called Fu Detsi couldn't help but smile when he saw Divine Zen Master and Rain Shensi. That's right. The two of them didn't hide their intentions and smiled. Chapter 1041. Although Fu Detsi looked young, he was actually the one who had cultivated for the longest time and had the most profound cultivation. Among the people present, Wu Daozi was a disciple of the sage Myriad Beast ancestor, while Tsang Muzi was a disciple of the sage Grand Dao ancestor. Rain Shensi was a disciple of the Nviwa Palace, while Shun Chan was a disciple of the Buddhist sect. Naturally, he was a disciple of the sage Amit Ba. Wu Weizi was a disciple of the sage Grand Mist Ancestor. In addition, Mad Do was a disciple of the sage Tong Tian, while Fu Detsi was a disciple of the sage Primordial Lord of Heaven. In this way, the 8 people present included all the disciples of the 7 great sages in this world. This was extremely rare. This person is Luo Fan, a cultivator who came from the future through the Arrow Whirlpool. When he first arrived, he was only a greater perfection quasi-sage. I don't know how he managed to achieve such a breakthrough in just a few million years. He actually became a peak quasi-sage, and the power of his divine ability grew to such a level. Among the people present, apart from Wu Daozi, only Rain Shinsi had seen Luo Fan before. Naturally, only Rain Shinsi explained to Fu Detsi. Hearing Rain Shinsi's words, Fu Detsi couldn't help but be slightly stunned. Then he couldn't help but praise. The sage martial uncle's plan is indeed unfathomable. Originally, I always thought that such a plan was meaningless, but I didn't expect it to actually attract such a genius. To be able to break through the biggest bottleneck of cultivation in just a short period of less than 10 million years, it's really amazing. Master Fu Detsi exclaimed in admiration. The way he looked at Luo Fan had already become very happy. Junior martial brother Wu Daozi, you really are blessed. You are truly blessed. Fu Detsi praised and said to Wu Daozi, who had an unhappy expression on his face. Senior martial brother must be joking. This is only because Master's plan is perfect, but it's not my blessing. Wu Daozi said with a stiff expression. Senior brother Wu Daozi, you jest. All of us have our own plans given to us by the saints, but only senior brother Wu Daozi has succeeded. Not to mention, he is such a powerful cultivator. If this is not senior brother's fortune, what is it? Rain Deity snickered. Rain Shinsi chuckled. Wu Daozi's expression became even uglier. A cultivator from a future was only a great perfection quasi-sage. Although he wasn't an ordinary great perfection quasi-sage, he wasn't much of a threat to Mo Wuji. If Mo Wuji wanted to kill him, he just had to bear the displeasure of his master. But now, in just a few million years, this great perfection quasi-sage had already turned over a new leaf. He actually broke through the bottleneck and became a pinnacle quasi-saint. It would be fine if that was all. Even a pinnacle quasi-sage would only be slightly troublesome for him. Who would have thought that the moment this cultivator broke through, the power of his spell would be so strong? If it weren't for Master Tsang Mu's protection, he might have completely broken free from Master Tsang Mu's control and even become the master of the house. He was going to control himself. Facing such a cultivator, how could he feel that it was his fortune? His own luck? If the person in front of him was like the obedient Taoist priest who would bow down and worship him the moment he heard that he was a disciple of the sage, then he would believe everything he said. That would be his good fortune and his good fortune. Senior brother Fu Detsi, I wonder if we should make a move now or wait? Rain Detsi asked with a smile as he watched the intense battle between Luo Fan and Do Guangzi. Let's wait. Now is not the right time. If we make a move now, junior brother Do Guangzi's chances of breaking through won't be the highest. I'm afraid we will waste this rare opportunity. Fu Detsi said sanctimoniously. Everyone understood what he meant. They all revealed an indescribable smile and looked at Do Guangzi with an incomparably dangerous gaze. Among them, the one with the most dangerous gaze was the petite Wu Weizi. He was gnashing his teeth so hard that it made a terrifying sound. Junior brother Do Guangzi can ignore it, but I'm afraid senior brother Tsang Mu can't ignore it. I wonder if senior brother Fu Detsi can save senior brother Tsang Mu. Rain Detsi's gaze turned to Tsang Mu Zi, who was wrapped in a ray of light not far behind Luo Fan, and said, Junior brother Tsang Mu Zi can't ignore it. Fu Detsi smiled and said, However, it's not good for me to make a move now. Luo Fan and junior brother Do Guangzi are fighting fiercely at this moment. If I save junior brother Tsang Mu Zi, it will definitely affect Luo Fan. At that time, I'm afraid junior brother Do Quangzi's opportunity to break through will disappear. That won't be worth it. Senior brother Tsangmu Zi can't be saved. Wu Wei Zi was taken aback at this moment. He didn't wait for Fu Detzi to finish speaking before he spoke. I mean, it is too important for senior brother Do Quangzi's cultivation right now. If he misses this opportunity, I don't know how many tens of millions of years he will have to wait for a similar opportunity. In any case, senior brother Tsangmu Zi is not in real danger right now. Why don't we let senior brother Tsangmu Zi stay there for a while, so as not to disturb senior brother Do Quangzi's opportunity? As soon as Wu Weizi said those words, he knew they were inappropriate and hurriedly explained himself. Among everyone present, Wu Dao Zi and Tsangmu Zi had the best relationship. The reason why Tsangmu Zi was in such an awkward situation was because he wanted to help Wu Wei Zi. From the bottom of his heart, he naturally hoped to save Tsangmu Zi as soon as possible. He was indeed a bit unhappy when Wu Wei Zi rejected him. But after listening to Wu Wei Zi's words, he felt that Wu Wei Zi's words were quite reasonable. It was indeed quite inappropriate to save Tsangmu Zi at this time. Tsangmu Zi, I'll have to trouble you for now. After this matter is over, I'll personally apologize to you. This thought flashed through Wu Dao Zi's mind, but he acted as if nothing had happened. He did not say anything, nor did he do anything. He just watched the battle between Do Quangzi and Luo Fan with the others. At this time, Crazy Battle had completely forgotten everything in the outside world. At this time, his eyes were burning with the raging flames of war. The feeling that he could lose and die at any time was tightly wrapped around him. He could only pour all of his spirit and will into Luo Fan, who was in front of him, and strive to fight with Luo Fan. He did not dare to be distracted. This battle was unimaginably intense. Crazy Do had almost exerted all the divine sense that he had cultivated in his life. The way he brandished his long staff seemed to display all the fighting mysteries of the universe. Every time it shook, the whole world would shake violently. Every arc of change contained the supreme mystery of the Great Way. Any change of his long staff was enough for any peak sage to comprehend it for a long time. It could even improve one's fighting ability beyond imagination. However, such a mysterious fighting method was still in a difficult position when facing Luo Fan. It was difficult for it to achieve any real effect. His situation became more and more difficult, and he was trying his best to step in the direction of failure. Every clash of power between him and Luo Fan left deep marks on his body. All of them left deep marks on his body, causing his power to be greatly impacted. He needed to expend more and more mental strength to continue controlling his power and continue to display that unimaginable combat strength. Under such circumstances, the feeling of failure became more and more obvious in Do Quangzi's heart. This made him more and more excited. Failure was his life's pursuit. There was success and failure. That was a battle. There was only success and no failure. That was only success, but not a real battle. The way of battle that he cultivated. He needed to have a complete battle. In other words, he needed to have a complete failure. Only a complete failure would allow him to truly understand what a battle was. Only then would he have a deeper understanding of the way of battle and achieve a breakthrough in his cultivation. Because of this, Do Quangzi didn't feel discouraged when he sensed the aura of failure. Instead, he became excited. The opportunity to break through that I've been chasing for so many years is here today. Ha! Do Quangzi's thoughts were still lingering in his mind. His body moved like a bolt of lightning, constantly shifting in the void. Mysterious trajectories, mysterious movements, and intricate combat abilities were constantly appearing in the void. Time, space, matter, and energy, under the influence of his magical ability, were simply like plasticine, being casually kneaded by him, erupting with astonishing destructive power, and constantly being thrown towards Luo Fan, who was directly facing him. However, his methods didn't have much effect on Luo Fan. Luo Fan's attainments in martial arts were extremely amazing and had almost reached the peak. The bright red axe in his hand swung and chopped. All kinds of attacks that Do Guangzi had displayed were directly turned into nothingness by him. It could only make the surrounding space, which had been completely shattered but had been completely suppressed by the power of the two of them. However, it still didn't break away from the suppression of the two of them and still maintained its seemingly unchanged state. Luo Fan cultivated the way of Dao fruit, which was based on the worldview of rules. Naturally, it wasn't a way of battle. However, the way of Dao fruit was all-encompassing. Although the benefits of this battle weren't as great for him as it was for Do Guangzi, it was still quite beneficial. It allowed him to have a deeper understanding of his own cultivation and the mysteries of the Dao Master Realm. Faintly, he even felt that his cultivation realm had a tendency to continue to rise. When one's cultivation realm had just broken through the bottleneck, it was in a stage of rapid progress. At this time, Luo Fan happened to be at this stage. At such a stage, it was much easier to improve his cultivation realm than usual. It was precisely because of this that Luo Fan's cultivation level had loosened just because of such an intense battle, and he felt like he was about to ascend. With the emergence of this feeling, his attacks naturally became more and more fierce. Three-dimensional talismans formed an axe shadow and shot out of the bright red axe in his hand. Then, these axe shadows blotted out the sky and rushed straight towards Mad Do. Each of these axe shadows contained infinite power and contained the power to destroy heaven and earth. If they directly broke out, it was enough to completely turn the void within a radius of millions of miles into a chaotic scene similar to the state of chaos. In the face of such axe shadows, Do Guangzi's face turned serious. The long stick in his hand trembled slightly. In an instant, a kind of golden light rushed out from the long stick and directly rushed towards the endless axe shadows. This golden light was extremely powerful and faintly had the magical effect of the ruler space-time. It also had the property of the magic treasure in Tsang Muzi's hand. When the axe shadows faced this golden light, they did not cause much of an impact. However, it didn't have much of an effect. It was completely annihilated by the golden light. Both of them turned into nothingness and didn't have much effect at all. At this moment, Fu Detsi, who was watching from the side, smiled and said, "Okay, now that junior brother Do Guangzi has reached a critical moment, it is time for us to help him." This sentence was a signal. After he said this, everyone present, including Wu Weizi, Rain Detsi, Wu Daozi, Shinshan, and Fu Detsi, attacked at the same time. Wu Weizi raised his hand and took out a 4-foot-long sword. This long sword looked like an ordinary bronze longsword. It looked extremely ordinary. After she appeared, she immediately brought this long sword with her. She almost fused with the sword and rushed towards Do Guangzi. The long sword looked so ordinary, but its effect was extremely shocking. At that moment, it seemed like the space-time within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was completely under the control of this long sword. The attack of the long sword seemed to be directly connected with karma, making it so that no matter where the target of the long sword hid, it could not truly dodge this long sword. At this moment, Wu Weizi's eyes were filled with killing intent. The corners of his mouth curled into a delighted smile. He looked as if he wanted to cut Mad Do down under his sword, causing Mad Do's body to perish and his soul to scatter. Following closely behind Wu Weizi, it was none other than Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi was holding the bronze ruler in his hand. This time, he did not activate the second layer of the bronze ruler's power. Instead, he held the ruler's body and pounced towards Mad Battle. His movements and the direction in which he pounced were perfectly coordinated with Wu Weizi. Their attacks did not interfere with each other at all. Instead, because of this perfect coordination, the power of their attacks was greatly increased, achieving the effect of 1 + 1 being greater than 2. Rain Shensi was not far behind the two of them. At this moment, she was holding a mirror in her hand. The mirror seemed to be made of bronze and looked like an ordinary dressing mirror. However, there were all sorts of unimaginable scenes displayed on it. She directly rushed towards Do Guangzi. As she rushed towards him, the scenes displayed on the mirror changed endlessly. The mirror also changed its trajectory according to the changes of the scenes. The speed at which the scenes in the mirror changed was beyond imagination. Even though everyone present was at the peak of the sage-to-be, they could not clearly see what the scenes were. However, as the mirror changed, both Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi realized that they could faintly sense that the way they attacked Do Guangzi had changed slightly. It became more perfect, and the possibility of success increased. Next to Rain Shinzi was God Zen Master. The God Zen Master held the prayer beads in his hand. The prayer beads looked very ordinary, as if they were carved from ordinary wood. He placed the prayer beads in the air, and the prayer beads looked like ordinary prayer beads as they flew towards Mad Fighter. He followed behind the prayer beads and seemed to be adjusting the prayer beads. Behind them was the strongest, Fu Zi, holding the jade scepter in his hand. Fu Detzi moved forward step by step in the air. His movements were so leisurely that it was unimaginable. However, his speed was not any slower than Wu Daozi, Wu Weizi, Rain Shinzi, and God Zen Master. As he moved forward, the jade scepter in his hand became more and more restrained. When it first appeared, it looked like a peerless jade sculpture. At first glance, one could tell that it was extremely precious. However, as he moved forward, the material of the jade scepter became more and more inferior. By the time he and the others arrived near Mad Do, the moment Mad Do sensed them, the material of the Rui jade had already turned into a jade-colored plastic. The inferior material and the sanctimonious and sage-like appearance of young Master Blessing were two polar opposites. When Fu Detzi and the others arrived, Luo Fan had already sensed them. However, at that time, the battle between him and Do Guangzi was in full swing, so he did not have the time to care about them. Just now, when they each took out a magic treasure that looked similar to the bronze ruler in Wu Daozi's hand and rushed towards him and Do Guangzi, he was so shocked that he almost gave up everything and ran away. Although he now had the confidence to face a pinnacle sage-to-be under a sage, he did not think that he could withstand the joint attack of 6 pinnacle sage-to-be under a sage with magic treasures that surpassed the pinnacle sage-to-be. If the reason why they rushed over was to help Do Guangzi and attack him, then of course he could only run as far as he could. Just as he was about to escape, he suddenly discovered a very strange thing. The target of their attack was not him, but the other person he was fighting, Do Guangzi. They seemed to be the disciples of a sage, so how could there be such a deep hatred between them? At this moment, they actually want to hit Do Guangzi when he is at a disadvantage, but they still want to attack him. Look at that attack. They simply want to kill him. Such a thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. At the same time, he stopped his plan to escape and began to urge the strongest power of the bright red great axe in his hand, directly chopping towards Do Guangzi's head. This bright red great axe was a big axe that Luo Fan had used a brand new method to materialize the mysteries of the times, and its power was incredible. Chapter 1042. At this moment, Mad Do had already sensed that the feeling of defeat had already covered the sky and the earth, completely obscuring all of his senses, making him feel as if he was completely immersed in the feeling of defeat. This feeling, for him, had long surpassed the level of defeat that he was looking forward to. The reason why he hoped for defeat was not because he was a masochist. Rather, it was because he wanted to perfect his Tao of battle, to let him know that there was another situation apart from victory. Under such circumstances, a moderate amount of failure was a great opportunity for him. It could allow him to understand the flaws in the Tao that he cultivated, and from there, he could achieve a great breakthrough in his Tao realm. However, the defeat that he was looking forward to did not include death. If he died and his Tao disappeared, even if he comprehended the flaws in his Tao, what could he do? Everything had already become nothing. So how could he hope for defeat? Because of this, death in defeat, although this was also a type of failure, had already surpassed his expectations, had already surpassed the limits of what he could bear. Therefore, at this very moment, when the feeling of defeat rose in his heart, Mad Do instantly woke up from that extremely rare state. With a slight movement of his mind, he had already discovered what exactly was happening around him. The eyes of Fu De Zi, Wu Dao Zi, Rain Deity Zi, Wu Wei Zi, and Shinchanzi were almost fiendish. In an instant, he knew that if he did not have a suitable response, today, this place would most likely be the place where he would die, the place where he would be buried. For a moment, he let out a loud roar. The long staff in his hand suddenly expanded from the size of a bowl to the size of a large pillar. With a slight tremble, incomparably bright golden light burst out from the long staff. This golden light was extremely mysterious. Each ray of golden light contained many mysteries of space-time and all living things. After these golden lights appeared, they turned into a light curtain, instantly wrapping around Mad Doe. Madman Doe was not an ignorant person. Among the people in front of him, among these people before him, any one of them had the strength to contend with him. When they combined together and displayed the magic treasures that they received from the sages, the power of the magic treasures was so strong that it simply surpassed the scope that any peak quasi-sage could withstand. If he did not defend, he would definitely be crushed into powder in an instant, turning invisible. This golden light was extremely profound, forming its own space-time, forming its own heaven and earth. The bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand was, after all, the fastest, and it directly chopped the golden light. In an instant, the entire world shook violently. The 10 suns in the sky seemed to dim in an instant, as if all the light had been absorbed by some unfathomable existence. Then, Mad Doe, who was enveloped by the golden light, felt his face turn pale, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. This was the first mouthful of blood that Mad Fighter had spat out since he joined the battle. With a single glance, one would be able to tell just how great the impact he had suffered was. With a single glance, one would be able to understand just how hard it was for him to block Luo Fan's axe. However, even though he was in a sorry state, even though it was difficult for him to block it, he still managed to block it. The bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand contained such a terrifying power. It contained such an incredible magical effect. However, in the face of that golden light, it could only cause a little bit of damage to Mad Doozy through that golden light, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. However, it couldn't split the golden light and couldn't really hurt him. Mad Fighter roared, and the pillar-like staff in his hand trembled slightly. A boundless force shot out from the golden light, intending to break through Luo Fan's layers of defense and injure Luo Fan. However, Luo Fan's body was wrapped in a layer of three-dimensional talisman that seemed to be invisible and intangible. As soon as the counterattack force came into contact with the three-dimensional talisman, it suddenly shook like a waterfall meeting a reef, stirring up an extremely huge momentum. However, it was unable to harm the reef, allowing the reef to stand tall in the huge waterfall, without the slightest tremble. At this time, Wu Weizi, who had made the first move, had already become one with his sword and directly collided with the golden light. The bronze sword in Wu Weizi's hand was also a magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. Its power was no less than Wu Daozi's bronze ruler. At this moment, the bronze sword and Wu Weizi's full power collided together. Mad Fighter did not have the time to care about what happened to Luo Fan. He hurriedly shook the pillar-like staff in his hand, trying his best to control the surrounding golden light to block the bronze sword. Offense always had an advantage over defense. All of the power of the bronze sword was condensed into a single point, while the power of the long stick was condensed into a spherical shape in order to protect Madman Doe's entire body. Thus, the result of the collision was very obvious. The bronze sword directly broke through the defense of the golden light with Wu Weizi and directly rushed towards Mad Fighter. If the staff in Mad Fighter's hand was still the size of a bowl, it would definitely be unable to defend against it. However, at this moment, the staff in Mad Fighter's hand had already become like a pillar. Therefore, he swung it in front of him, and the staff acted like a shield between him and the bronze sword. The way he swung his long stick was very mysterious and contained the subtlety of countless battles he had experienced in his life. That mysterious and untraceable movement, aside from Luo Fan, who had profound attainments in martial arts, who could grasp it and clearly see its specific posture. No other cultivator could react at all. Although Wu Weizi was also at the pinnacle of the quasi-sages and was also the disciple of a sage, her battle experience was far inferior to mad fighters. Therefore, she was unable to react. The bronze sword directly pierced the staff. A loud crack resounded. The heaven and earth shook again. The 10 suns in the sky that had just recovered dimmed again. Mad Fighter felt his body shake violently, and he spat out a large mouthful of blood. This time, the blood he spat out was not the same as before. It was extremely fresh and contained vitality and power. It even turned into the blood of countless strange creatures in midair. Madman Do's complexion turned pale again. Just as Wu Weizi was about to make a move, Wu Daozi's bronze ruler had already moved through the crack in the golden light and headed straight for Mad Fighter. Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi cooperated very well. In an instant, their figures flashed and they made way for Wu Daozi. The bronze ruler in Wu Daozi's hand pierced through the staff and headed straight for Mad Fighter's head. Mad Fighter's head was about to be completely destroyed by the bronze ruler. His body would die, his Tao would vanish, and his soul would scatter. If it was before, Mad Fighter, who had not improved at all, would not have been able to deal with such a situation. But at this moment, it was different. Under the stimulation of the incomparably intense danger of defeat, his understanding of the way of battle had improved a lot. At this critical moment, he actually reacted. As he retreated, he swung the staff in his hand again. In an almost impossible situation, the staff moved in an unimaginably profound trajectory in the air. It directly blocked between the bronze ruler and his head. Wu Daozi's battle experience was richer than Wu Weizi's. However, compared to a battle maniac like Mad Fighter, he was still far from being able to deal with it. The bronze ruler in his hand could not change its position in time. It directly hit the pillar-like staff. There was a loud crack. Heaven and earth shook and the 10 suns dimmed. This time, the surrounding space-time could not be suppressed. A gray, primal-like state of chaos was produced from the collision. It was like a gray cloud that surrounded Wu Daozi in mad battle. Wu Daozi was protected by the power of the bronze ruler. Between the dusky clouds, it was as if he was in a normal space. There were no changes at all. The golden light around Do Quangzi's body could even resist the giant axe in Luo Fan's hand. So these dusky, chaotic scenes were naturally not a problem. Needless to say, Luo Fan and Wu Weizi. Luo Fan was protected by an invisible three-dimensional talisman made of gray mist. Naturally, he would be fine. The bronze sword in Wu Weizi's hand was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the quasi-sage level. It would not be a problem for it to protect her. Hence, none of the people present were affected by the appearance of the grayish clouds around them. Mad Fighter barely managed to block the attack from Wu Daozi's bronze ruler. He was in an even worse state than before. He spat out mouthfuls of blood. The blood was more vivid than when he blocked Wu Weizi's attack. The blood-colored creatures were stronger and more mysterious. However, they were still surrounded by the grayish chaos. If they were in another location, these blood-colored creatures would still have a chance to live. However, in this place, even Luo Fan and the others had to rely on various methods to protect themselves. How could these blood-colored creatures that had just been born escape? However, it was warped by the gray chaos around it, and it disappeared without a trace. It seems that these people have been greatly offended by Mad Fighter in the past. Otherwise, he would not be so ruthless to deal with him. Luo Fan looked at Rain Shensi, Divine Zen Master, and Fu Detsi who were rushing in from the outside, and thought to himself. Rain Shensi and the others were not much slower than Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi. When Wu Daozi's bronze ruler collided with the long rod, Rain Shensi had already used the bronze mirror to rush into the golden light. The bronze mirror flashed with countless lights and shadows. It passed through Wu Weizi, Wu Daozi, and the long rod that was blocking Wu Daozi and rushed towards Mad Fighter's head. In the face of such a bronze mirror, Madman Do didn't have enough time to use his staff to block it. He roared and his eyes flashed with madness. Half of his body instantly collapsed into a bloody mist and condensed into a huge hand in front of him. This huge hand was extremely fast, and the position it condensed in was also very mysterious. The moment it formed was the moment the bronze mirror hit the palm of the hand. At this moment, the huge hand formed by the bloody mist suddenly clenched and held the bronze mirror in its palm. The direction in which the bronze mirror moved was extremely mysterious and profound. It adjusted itself countless times in the void at every moment, and every adjustment was based on the situation it encountered. Normally speaking, if Madman Do used his staff to block the bronze mirror, no matter how exquisite it was, he wouldn't even need Rain Deity to adjust it. The bronze mirror would automatically change shape and bypass the defense, directly making Madman Do's interception a bubble. But at this moment, Mad Fighter did not use such a method. He directly collapsed half of his body and used the power of that half of his body. The ultimacy directly condensed into a giant hand and held the bronze mirror in its palm. This transformation process didn't require time or space. It was as if it had existed since ancient times, and the bronze mirror was already in its hand. The bronze mirror had no time to react, let alone dodge the bloody mist hand. Therefore, it was directly held in the palm of the bloody mist hand. However, the bronze mirror was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of the Sage-to-Be level. Even though his most exquisite transformation had been dodged by Mad Fighter at the cost of a great sacrifice. But the power of the bronze mirror itself, it was still extremely incredible. In the moment of the collision, the bronze mirror's power burst forth. With a loud crack, the world shook. The bloody mist hand directly collapsed into countless bloody mists, unable to maintain the appearance of a huge hand. However, it was completely destroyed by the bronze mirror. Mad Fighter did not spit blood at this moment. Instead, 7 streams of blood gushed out of his 7 orifices. It looked like his entire body had turned into a fountain. That tragic appearance was enough to send a chill down the spine of anyone who saw it. The bronze mirror that Rain Deity used also lost the power to move forward at this moment and directly stopped in place. Mad Fighter was in such a tragic state. Rain Deity, who had clashed head-on with him without holding back, was not unscathed either. Her body stopped in midair, and her face turned pale for a while before she recovered. Among the 3 of them, Rain Deity was the one who looked the most miserable. Although Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi's attacks were blocked, they did not suffer much damage. Their expressions and actions were no different from before, as if nothing had happened. The reason for this was none other than the fact that Madman Do was merely trying his best to block their attacks. As for Rain Shenxi's attacks, he was counterattacking. Wu Weizi and Wu Daozi only needed to withstand the power that they had unleashed. Because they were prepared, they naturally did not suffer much damage. Rain Deity, on the other hand, had to withstand the even more terrifying power that Mad Fighter had unleashed. It was impossible for him not to be in a miserable state. Divine Zen Master and Fu Deity were equally fast. Before Rain Deity and the others could gather their attacks again, they had already passed them and attacked Mad Fighter at the same time. In God Zen Master's hand was a string of thought beads. It looked very ordinary, but no matter what kind of power it was, it could not stop it. Whether it was the gray cloud that was produced from the battle or the golden light that Do Kuangzi had released, none of them could stop the thought beads at all. The thought beads and God Zen Master easily passed through without any obstruction. As for the Jade Rui in Fu Deity's hand that looked like it was made of plastic, it seemed to be commanding everything. It was not that the countless obstructing powers could not be discovered. Instead, they directly yielded to the Jade Rui and naturally moved aside before it passed through, revealing a path for Fu Deity to pass through. This allowed the Jade Rui and Divine Zen Master to directly arrive in front of Mad Fighter. Junior brother Mad Fighter, there is no need to thank me. We are fellow disciples. It is only natural for me to help you break through. Fu Deity actually had the time to speak at this critical moment. His words were spoken in such a short amount of time, yet everyone present could hear them clearly. Not a single word was mixed up in his words. When Mad Fighter heard this voice, his eyes flashed with endless anger. After killing me to this state, he actually said that he was helping me and that I don't need to thank him? Is there such a shameless person in this world? Fu Deity did not give Mad Fighter a chance to curse back. The Jade Rui in his hand and the prayer beads in Divine Zen Master's hand hit Mad Fighter at the same time. Mad Fighter had already exhausted all his energy to block the attacks of Luo Fan, Wu Weizi, Wu Daozi, and Rain Deity. At this time, facing the most ferocious Fu Deity and Divine Zen Master, he only had time to explode his body and turn it into a blood mist in an attempt to resist. His whole body was completely destroyed by the Jade Rui and prayer beads. The moment he was destroyed, Mad Fighter's mind seemed to have transcended to an unimaginable realm. In an instant, his will was drowned by countless thoughts. His time seemed to have completely stopped at this moment. This originally insignificant time of not knowing how many billionths of a millisecond had become incomparably long to him, so long that he could not see the end. This is his failure? In such a wonderful state, Mad Fighter's spirit was unprecedentedly clear, and he had a very deep understanding of the state he was in. I'm going to die. It turns out that this is failure. As he thought so, his face involuntarily pulled into an incomparably ugly smile. As he came to this realization, the memories he thought he had forgotten began to surface from the depths of his memory. These memories started from hundreds of millions of years ago when he was just born. They continued to develop and evolve, and eventually he was accepted as a disciple by sect leader Tong Tian, who taught him the way of fighting, and then developed until the moment of his final defeat. All the memories during this period, no matter how small and subtle they were, reappeared without any omission, making him feel as if he had re-experienced the entire course of his life. It would take at least tens of thousands of years for him to re-experience the memories of hundreds of millions of years from beginning to end in his mind. But at this time, when he completely experienced these memories, he was still in the moment of life and death, as if those tens of thousands of years did not exist at all for him. Chapter 1043. After he smiled contentedly, he felt that time had returned to normal. His whole body collapsed into a mist of blood. Even a mist of blood completely collapsed and turned into nothingness in an instant. In the midst of the gray chaos, only a pillar-like long stick was left where Mad Do used to be. It emitted a golden light and formed a golden pure land in the midst of the gray chaos. At this moment, Fu Detsi, Shunchan Master, Wu Daozi, Yushintsi, and Wu Weizi were slightly stunned. They seemed to be a little happy, but also a little disappointed. They looked at each other and sighed. Fu Detsi was about to say something, but his expression suddenly changed. The moment his expression changed, so did the others. Suddenly, the golden light emitted by the huge long stick in the gray fog suddenly retracted. In an instant, it became invisible. Then, endless golden light burst out from the long stick, and a great force directly acted on the cultivators around the long stick. This force was unimaginably huge. Although it was not an absolute destructive force, if it was in the outside world, even an ordinary peak sage to be would be crushed into powder and turned into nothingness the moment they came into contact with this force. But obviously, among the people present, there was no ordinary peak sage to be. Even Luo Fan, although he seemed to have just become a Tao master, was many times more powerful than an ordinary peak sage to be. Such a great force was no different to him. The moment he was hit by such a great force, he seemed to have crossed time and space. The moment he was hit by such a great force, he seemed to have crossed time and space. It was as if time and space didn't exist at all, and it directly appeared outside the gray cloud. It looked like he had torn the void to teleport through time and space. What's going on? Luo Fan was taken aback. He stared at the gray cloud in front of him. The whole cloud was similar to the cloud caused by the battle between Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi, but it was more chaotic. Back then, Daoist Chuanzong had to consume the eternal day cosmos pill to barely be able to see it, But to the current Luo fan, it was just the most ordinary of gray mist. He could see through the cloud with a single glance, and he could see all the minute changes happening within the cloud. Right at this moment, Master Fuda and the others were unable to resist that shocking force. His figure seemed to have traversed space and time and appeared not far away from Luo fan. He was also outside the cloud. The expressions on the faces of the few of them were extremely ugly at this moment. In fact, there was even a hint of regret in their eyes. It seemed that things had not developed as they had expected. Luo fan was in no mood to care about them. At this moment, the changes in the cloud were happening. It had already attracted all of his attention, so much so that he could no longer spare any attention to pay attention to any changes in the people around him. In the dusky clouds, the golden light that was emitted from the pillar pierced through the surrounding dusky clouds like countless sharp swords. It pierced out of the cloud, instantly shattering the gray cloud and gradually collapsing into nothingness under the golden light. The original location of the cloud seemed to have turned into a huge sun. From afar, it looked like 11 suns had appeared in the sky. Within the golden light, an unimaginable and mysterious thing was happening. The pillar-like pole began to shrink. The golden light did not weaken even as it shrank. Instead, it became more and more intense and dazzling, more and more terrifying. The surrounding heaven and earth completely surrendered under the golden light. Vaguely, the great Tao seemed to have broken away from the unseen world and fused with the pole. At this moment, the pole was the great Tao, and the great Tao was the pole. Countless strange powers that even Luo fan found incomprehensible were born out of thin air and began to condense and outline beside the pole. Endless mysteries of the great Tao began to emit from the pole, constantly fusing with the countless strange powers that were condensing and outlining. This change was extremely fast, but it was also extremely complicated. Standing here, Luo fan felt that the great Tao seemed to have lifted the layers of barriers that originally blocked it in front of him, revealing its true appearance and the true principles it contained more clearly than ever before. Luo fan cultivated the Tao, fruit, great Tao, based on the worldview of laws. The great Tao of this Earth's universe was not as important to him as it was to the cultivators of other Earth's universes. However, the principles, mysteries, and truths contained within the great Tao were extremely profound and precious after all. Even if he did not cultivate the same cultivation method as Fudizi and the others, and did not rely on the great Tao as much as they did, it was still extremely beneficial for him to comprehend the mysteries of the great Tao and feel the various principles contained within the great Tao. At this moment, watching the changes caused by the pole was a process that was extremely beneficial for Luo fan. Looking at the changes, he faintly felt that his comprehension of the Tao Master Realm was getting deeper, and his cultivation realm began to improve by leaps and bounds. In a trance, he could even specifically feel that his cultivation realm had been improved. Compared to Luo fan's current earth-shattering cultivation realm, the increase that he could sense was already an extremely inconceivable improvement. If it was someone else, such a little improvement in cultivation realm would even be enough for any ordinary person to cultivate to a sage to be from scratch. From this, one could see how terrifying this improvement was. I didn't expect that I would actually help him. It's really a case of going for wool and coming home shorn. Wu Weizi's expression was extremely ugly at this moment. The killing intent in his eyes was even more intense than before, and he was almost gnashing his teeth as he spoke. Junior brother Do Guangzi was able to achieve a breakthrough. Although it is a blessing, it is also the result of many of us working together. I think junior brother Do Guangzi must be filled with gratitude. Divine Zen Master said with a slight smile. That's right. Junior brother Do Guangzi has been stuck in this realm for billions of years. Now that he has broken through the bottleneck, his future achievements will be limitless, and the possibility of becoming a saint has increased by several folds. But he should be grateful. Fudizi also laughed and said, looking at the way they spoke, it seemed that they were not the ones who regretted and had a change of expression before. Senior brother Fudizi's words are reasonable, and Senior Brother Divine Zen Master's words are also very logical. Rain Shinsi said with a charming smile. The few of them were lying with their eyes open, but Wu Daozi's face was full of helplessness. He looked at the golden sun in front of him with a relaxed and helpless look in his eyes. He was relaxed because Do Kuangzi did not die, although he wanted him to die before. After all, Do Kuangzi was the disciple of the Supreme Saint, Sect Master Tongtian. If he really died, even if he was also the disciple of a saint, he would probably suffer some hardships and suffer a lot of punishment. Now that Do Kuangzi did not die, it naturally saved him from punishment. For him, of course it was worth it to feel relaxed. As for feeling helpless, that was naturally even simpler. Do Kuangzi's actions were really too evil. He wished that he could disappear immediately. At this moment, not only did Do Kuangzi not die, but he also obtained a huge breakthrough. Was this not enough for him to feel helpless? Taoist Luo Fan, I wonder if you can release Junior Brother Tsongmuzi? Fudizi looked at the golden sun for a while and turned around. He said to Luo Fan, who was standing on the side. Luo Fan was currently paying attention to the changes in the golden light and was unwilling to pay attention to him. It was just that although Fudizi spoke indifferently, his voice was full of a magical effect that made it difficult for him to concentrate and observe. He could only helplessly return to his senses. He turned to look at Fudizi, only to see that Fudizi had a very gentle expression on his face, like a sanctimonious old man. However, through his previous actions, Luo Fan had long known that the person in front of him was simply shameless. If he really judged a person by their appearance and regarded him as an expert, then what awaited him would be an incomparably miserable experience. Through observing the situation of Fudizi's actions, Luo Fan had a rough measure of his strength. He knew that the power of Fudizi's magical ability was a level stronger than that of Wu Daozi and the others. Although he was confident that he could escape, it would be much more difficult to win than facing Wu Daozi and the others. Under such circumstances, it was obviously not a wise choice to anger this person. As for Tsongmuzi, with so many people on the other side, whether or not Tsongmuzi joined the battle would not affect the situation much. Even if he was sealed, if the other side wanted to attack, he could only escape. Even if he was released, the other side would have Tsongmuzi join the battle. For him, the result would not change much, and he could only escape. Under such circumstances, it was very obvious what Luo Fan should choose. Thus, Luo Fan said indifferently, "Now that the battle is over, there is no need to seal fellow Tsongmuzi anymore. There is naturally no problem letting him out. Fellow Tsongmuzi is very righteous. I admire you." Fudizi smiled and bowed. Luo Fan smiled, raised his hand, and pointed at the place where Ashen Muzi was. In an instant, a gray talisman appeared around the light around Tsongmuzi's body. Then, with a slight tremble, the gray talisman collapsed and slowly disappeared into the world. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace and could no longer be found. The light that wrapped around Master Ashen Muzi instantly rushed out and suddenly spread out 100 times before stopping. Master Ashen Muzi could not control his emotions and let out a long roar. After a while, he stopped. As he stopped roaring, the branch in Tsongmuzi's hand began to withdraw the light. In the blink of an eye, all the light was withdrawn. The branch was still like a pole, and the place where Tsongmuzi was returned to normal. At this moment, Master Ashen Muzi's movements did not seem much different from before. He was still dignified and had the demeanor of an immortal. It was impossible to tell that he had experienced the misfortune of being sealed and unable to move. Tsongmuzi, who had escaped, looked around and noticed that Luo Fan was standing to the side. He sighed and bowed to Luo Fan. This bow represented that he had admitted that he was defeated by Luo Fan. He truly believed that his skills were inferior to others and no longer thought that the method he adopted was wrong like before. He should have taken out his full strength earlier. Seeing this, Luo Fan secretly admired Tsongmuzi's ability to take things and let them go. It was the right thing to do to reciprocate. He didn't go too far, smiled, and returned the bow. The actions of the two had the intention of letting go of the enmity with a smile. After Song Muzi and Luo Fan returned the bow, they came forward to greet Fudizi and the others. Song Muzi was also a sage's disciple. His status was similar to Fudizi and the others, and they were quite friendly. This time, it was thanks to their arrival that he was able to escape the fate of being sealed. Naturally, he was more friendly to them. It's a pity that I missed the opportunity this time. I'm afraid it will be very difficult to find another opportunity like this next time. Song Muzi looked at the 11th sun in the sky with some pity. He sighed. If he was like before, there would be many opportunities like this. Wu Weizi no longer concealed his displeasure towards Do Guangzi. It's a pity that fellow Taoist Luo Fan was unwilling to let me out. If he had let me out earlier, I'm afraid the situation would have been different. Perhaps Do Guangzi really went this time. It's really a pity. Song Muzi sighed. How can Junior Marshal Brother Song Muzi have such thoughts? We came here to help Junior Marshal Brother Do Guangzi break through. How can you have such thoughts? Fudizi said gently. Yes. Senior Marshal Brother is right. I was wrong. Song Muzi chuckled and said without any sincerity. Fudizi acted as if he could not hear the sincerity in his words. He nodded with satisfaction and smiled. It was as if he felt that Song Muzi's apology was perfect. However, it's really a pity. Song Muzi turned his head and looked at the sun that had appeared for a long time. He still had a regretful look on his face. This time, Fudizi didn't say anything. The few of them felt that it was a pity, regret, and helplessness as they looked at the dazzling sun in front of them. Fellow Taoist Luo Fan is really a genius. You've only just reached the peak of quasi-sage, but you're already able to defeat fellow Taoist Song Muzi. It's really admirable. Divine Zen Master was interested in Luo Fan and said to Luo Fan with a smile, I wouldn't dare. I was just lucky just now. I'm far inferior to the experts under the sages. Luo Fan said with a smile, That's a little fake. You've only just reached the peak of quasi-sage, but you were able to luckily seal senior brother Song Muzi, who was at the peak of quasi-sage. This isn't inferior at all. Rain Deity and Luo Fan were friends, so he interrupted. Last time, the Rain Deity only saw Luo Fan as a rather interesting cultivator, but after seeing how powerful Luo Fan was, his opinion of Luo Fan had changed greatly. He directly regarded Luo Fan as an expert who could stand on equal footing with them, so there was much more respect in his eyes than before. Fellow Taoist Rain Deity, you're exaggerating. Luo Fan chuckled. He didn't feel uneasy about being exposed by Rain Deity, nor did he feel proud of his strength. He just stood there calmly. It's a pity. If you had joined Emperor Envaiwa's palace, your mystique would definitely be much stronger. It's really a pity. Rain Deity looked at his calm appearance and said with admiration. His words seemed a little illogical. Luo Fan didn't agree to join Emperor Envaiwa's palace, but he still became so powerful after reaching the peak of quasi-sage. He could even be mentioned in the same breath as Rain Deity, who was already at the peak of quasi-sage. Under such circumstances, she was still so confident in her cultivation and believed that Luo Fan would definitely have a better future if he joined Emperor Envaiwa's palace. Such logic would be bullsh asterisk T in other places. Even a fool wouldn't say such a thing. However, at this moment, such logic sounded so natural from the mouth of Rain Deity, who was obviously extraordinarily intelligent. Even Divine Zen Master and the others felt that it was only natural. It was extremely unbelievable. However, Luo Fan could understand such logic very well. He didn't think that it was stupid for them to have such logic. There was no other reason than that there was a sage in Emperor Envaiwa's palace. A sage who was omnipotent and undefeatable. He would not be destroyed even if heaven and earth were destroyed, and would not be destroyed even if heaven and earth were destroyed. In the eyes of Rain Deity and the others, sages were supreme and powerful. As long as anything was related to sages, it would far surpass anything that had nothing to do with sages. Naturally, it was the same for cultivation methods. Even though Luo Fan had just reached the pinnacle of the sage to be, he was able to be on par with the disciples of the pinnacle of the sage-to-be. It was only because he was talented and the disciples of the sage-to-be couldn't perfectly exert the power of the techniques passed down by the sage-to-be. It didn't mean that the techniques Luo Fan cultivated were better than those passed down by the sage-to-be. Under such circumstances, in Rain Shenxi's opinion, if Luo Fan could make such an incredible achievement by cultivating a relatively weak cultivation method, if he joined Emperor Nvoi's palace and cultivated the cultivation method passed down by the sages, his achievement would be even greater and his current strength would be even more terrifying. After understanding their thoughts, Zhou Weiqing didn't find it strange for Rain Deity to say such words at this moment. Of course, although Luo Fan understood their thoughts, he obviously didn't think so. Chapter 1044. What a hypocrite, Rain Deity said with a faint smile. However, it was just a casual remark. Everyone had their own ambitions. How could this kind of thing be forced? It's normal that Taoist Luo Fan doesn't want to join Vaiwa Palace. Your Vaiwa Palace only accepts women and discriminates against male cultivators. I believe you wanted Taoist Luo Fan to become a woman when you first invited him. Divine Zen Master chuckled. What's wrong with that? For us, what's the difference between a man and a woman? What's the point of changing a body compared to achieving Tao? Rain Shenxi said disdainfully. Hee, that's just your opinion. Even I won't agree, let alone Taoist Luo Fan. Divine Zen Master smiled. Hump, man. Rain Shenxi frowned and snorted, but he didn't say anything else. How could she find a way to refute this kind of reason that she only used this is your own opinion? I don't think so. Seeing that Rain Shenxi didn't say anything else, Divine Zen Master turned to Luo Fan and said, I am Divine Zen Master. My master is the sage Amiba. I think Taoist friend is very suitable for our Tao. Why don't you come with me to the pure land of Buddhism? I will introduce you to my master and try my best to make him accept you as a disciple. What do you think? Our pure land of Buddhism doesn't discriminate. It doesn't restrict gender or race. No matter what you are, it won't be an obstacle for you to join our sect. Don't worry. Divine Zen Master smiled. Thank you for your kindness, but I'm too obsessed with my Tao. I don't think I have the fortune to become your fellow sect member. Luo Fan had now formed his own worldview, and the Tao fruit Tao that he cultivated was completely rooted in his own worldview. It could be said that it was the most suitable cultivation path for him in the endless world. He did not believe that the sage could give him a cultivation path that was more suitable than the current Tao fruit Tao. Under such circumstances, how could he agree to this divine Zen Master? Of course, he just brushed it off. When the God Zen Master heard this, he couldn't help but say with pity, That's truly a pity. Although the power of your abilities is extremely shocking, you don't have the guidance of a sage sovereign after all. I'm afraid it will be difficult for you to maintain your speed of improvement in the future. If it were me, no matter how deep this obsession is, I wouldn't be able to resist it. I will definitely do my best to change it. Obviously, although Luo Fan had already said that, young Zen Master still refused to give up. He just changed his method of persuasion. Luo Fan smiled and shook his head. Junior brother God, Zen Master. When did you take on the role of a guide in the pure land of Buddhism? Why didn't I know about it? Fu Detzi heard everything clearly. At this moment, he smiled and said, Senior martial brother, you've misunderstood. I've never accepted that position. I just saw that Taoist Luo Fan is a genius, and I couldn't bear for him to waste his talent. God Zen Master smiled. Luo Fan did not feel anything when Zen Master Shin said that it would be a waste of his talent if he did not join a sage. The pride in his heart was something that the God Zen Master and the others would never understand. Since that was the case, why bother arguing with them? Hearing this, Master Fuda couldn't help but smile and said, Everyone has their own fortune, and everyone has their own blessings. Junior brother, you think this is a pure land, but for others, it might be hell. Why force it? Senior martial brother is right. Junior martial brother understands. God Zen Master said. As he said that, he bowed to Luo Fan and said, I was impulsive and caused trouble for fellow Taoist. Taoist God Zen Master is too serious. I didn't know how to appreciate your kindness. Luo Fan smiled and said, Just as they were speaking, the ball of golden light that looked like the 11th sun in the sky trembled slightly and abruptly shrank in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a golden figure holding a long stick in front of everyone. The golden light on the golden figure was still extremely dazzling, making it impossible to see what he looked like. Even if he was tall, short, fat, and thin, they could only see a trace of his outline. The golden light on the golden figure was extremely dazzling. If it wasn't for the fact that everyone present was an outstanding person, even if any of them were great perfection quasi-sages, this light would have been enough to blind their eyes. Today, I feel that my hundreds of millions of years of cultivation is like a dream. From now on, there will no longer be Madman Do in this world, only God Do. At this moment, a leisurely sigh came from the golden figure. This voice was filled with an invisible awareness and contained a kind of indescribable freedom. This voice was completely the voice of Madman Do, but the feeling it gave off was completely different from Madman Do. It was almost like the difference between heaven and earth. There is no longer that shocking battle intent, no longer that unconcealable provocation. He was completely a Taoist master who wholeheartedly cultivated the Taoist path and did not care about external things. As these words were spoken, the golden light gradually faded. In the end, it completely disappeared, and a figure that everyone present was very familiar with appeared. It was a skinny and short young man holding a long rod in his hand. It was Madman Do. However, compared to the original Madman Do, there was a kind of roundness surrounding his body now. There was no longer the feeling of sharpness from before. The most direct feeling that he gave off had become a kind of charm instead of battle intent. It was as if he had been reborn. I didn't expect Taoist Brother God, Do, to make such progress. Congratulations. Fu Detsi chuckled and said to the new Madman Do, who was also God Do, I also have to thank senior brothers and sisters for their help. If it wasn't for you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have such achievements today. God Do thanks everyone. God Do said with a cold expression. Although he had gained great benefits, such as directly improving his cultivation realm and improving his mastery of the magic treasure beyond the peak of the sage-to-be level to the third realm, he would not forget why these people were here and what they had done before. Even though God Do was no longer the Madman Do he used to be, he no longer had that kind of crazy desire to fight against cultivators who wanted to kill him. He wouldn't want to fight to the death so easily, but he also wouldn't give them a good face so quickly. Whether it was God Do or Fu Detsi, these people were all well aware of this. However, it was different to talk about it. Therefore, among everyone present, apart from Wu Weizi, who was still in a bad mood, everyone else smiled slightly, as if they were very happy for God Do's breakthrough. However, apart from Fu Detsi, everyone else had a kind of solemnity and vigilance in their hearts. Compared to them, Madman Do was only on par. Their control over the magic treasure in their hands was at the second realm. In this way, although they weren't a match for Madman Do, who specialized in fighting, the gap between them wasn't too big. God Do wouldn't be able to defeat them in a short period of time. However, at this moment, Madman Do had become God Do. He had already reached the third level of control over the magic treasure that surpassed the pinnacle of the quasi-sage level. This was a realm that was on par with Fu Detsi. Such a realm. To defeat them, the difficulty had been reduced by many times compared to before. It was even possible that the outcome would be decided in a few days, allowing God Do to completely toy with them. Life and death were all in his hands. In such a situation, they couldn't help but raise their vigilance against God Do. As for Fu Detsi, God Do had just mastered the third realm of the magic treasure in his hand. Compared to him who had mastered the third realm of the magic treasure for many years, he was still a bit weak. Even if God Do cultivated the Tao of fighting and was much stronger than the average peak of the quasi-saint realm, he could at most be on par with him. It was basically impossible for him to defeat him. Therefore, he could behave so naturally and calmly. Since Junior Brother God Do has successfully broken through today, our mission is considered to be completed. Why don't we bid farewell here? Fu Detsi said with a smile. As he spoke, he bowed towards Wu Daozi. Wu Daozi hurriedly bowed back. Fu Detzi was the strongest among the people present. Since he said that he was leaving, the others naturally couldn't stay and immediately bid farewell to Wu Daozi one by one. Although Wu Daozi was a bit uneasy and worried that God Do would cause trouble for him after they left. This was his dojo after all. The others didn't have any obligation to help him. Since they wanted to leave, he naturally couldn't hold them back. Therefore, he could only helplessly send them off. In a short while, only Wu Daozi, Ashenmu Zi, God Do, and Luo Fan were left. Even Wu Wei Zi, who was the most unhappy with God Do, had already left. Seeing that everyone had left, the God Do Zi turned around and looked at Luo Fan and the others with an indifferent gaze. His gaze seemed calm and indifferent, but there seemed to be turbulent waves hidden within, as if they could erupt at any time and drown everyone. Now that I have made a breakthrough, I want to test how much my cultivation has improved. Now that everyone is here, why don't you all give me some pointers? God Do Zi said indifferently. At this moment, God Do Zi's heart was actually filled with anger. Although he seemed to have changed completely, even his name had changed from God Do to God Do Zi. That didn't mean that he didn't care about what had happened before. It meant that he didn't feel any anger in his heart. He had remembered every single bit of the attacks that Luo Fan and the others had thrown at him. That kind of anger was naturally still accumulating in his mind. He was also extremely unhappy with Fu Detzi and the others and really wanted to teach them a lesson. It was just that Fu Detzi and the others had the advantage in numbers. If he were to make a move, he would only give them a chance to deal with him. So he didn't make a move and let them leave. But now, the situation was different. Fu Detzi and the others had already left. Although there were still a lot of people in front of him, Luo Fan, Wu Daozi, and Ashenmu Zi, he was already confident that he could defeat them. Under such circumstances, if he didn't vent his anger, then when would he be able to? God Do Zi, it seems that you haven't changed much. So what if you have changed your name? Your essence hasn't changed. No matter how many times you change your name, it's all in vain. Wu Daozi said indifferently. I am God Do Zi, not a turtle that hides its head. If I don't even dare to take revenge for the grievances I suffered, then what's the difference between me and a turtle that hides its head? God Do Zi said indifferently. As he spoke, he slightly swung the long rod in his hand. In an instant, an imposing manner that was 100 times stronger than Do Kuangzi's surged out from his body and directly pressed towards Luo Fan, Wu Daozi, and Ashenmu Zi. This imposing manner was unimaginably powerful, so much so that even the surrounding heaven and earth had a subtle distortion, causing the heaven and earth within a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles to seem to have changed at this moment. It was as if it was completely separated from the outside world, becoming a world that was under the absolute control of God Do Zi. In the face of God Do Zi's imposing manner, the expressions of Luo Fan and the others changed slightly. This imposing manner's control over the surrounding heaven and earth was actually nothing to the three of them. Their current defense could completely isolate this kind of control over them. Needless to say, Luo Fan's body still had that invisible three-dimensional talisman around him, and this three-dimensional talisman could even completely isolate the erosion of the rectangular space-time. Moreover, this imposing manner's control over the surrounding heaven and earth. At this moment, Wu Daozi and Ashenmu Zi were holding something in their hands. Similarly, it was a magic treasure that surpassed the peak of quasi-sage grade. For them, this defense was naturally almost absolute, and of course, they would not be affected by this imposing manner's control over heaven and earth. What made their expressions change slightly was that the process of God Do Zi controlling the surrounding heaven and earth was really too easy, too casual. It was as if this heaven and earth was not controlled by his imposing manner. Instead, after his imposing manner was released, it was naturally attached to his imposing manner and naturally changed to match his imposing manner. This kind of casualness represented that God Do Zi's intrinsic quality had improved. It represented that his intrinsic quality was already extremely different from the previous God Do Zi. This was the real reason why their expressions changed slightly. In the face of such a god dozi, the three of them naturally did not dare to be negligent. The bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand swayed slightly. His figure flashed, and the bright red axe directly split the heaven and earth, directly blasting towards God Dozi. Wu Dao Zi and Ashimu Zi did not show any signs of weakness. Each of them held their magic treasures in their hands and followed behind Luo Fan. In an extremely exquisite and well-coordinated manner, they directly pounced towards God Dozi. The God Dozi looked at the three of them, and a faint, cold smile appeared on his face. The long staff in his hand swayed slightly. In an instant, as if it was directly communicating with cause and effect, it directly appeared in front of Luo Fan, and suddenly blasted on the bright red axe in Luo Fan's hand. An indescribable force directly exploded from the long staff. This force was unknown how many times stronger than the power of God Dozi, who had previously fought with Luo Fan. In an instant, it actually gave Luo Fan a feeling that he was unable to resist. His entire body almost instantly lost control, and his entire body directly turned into a meteor along with that force. In an instant, he flew hundreds of thousands of miles away and directly blasted on a cave abode on the Chelan Cliff. There was a loud rumbling sound. The cave abode directly turned into nothingness. Even the ground of the Chelan Cliff collapsed along with the cave abode, and a huge, bottomless cave appeared. Luo Fan lay at the bottom of the cave for a long time. Under the terrifying force wreaking havoc all over his body, he only felt that his entire body was sore and weak, and he could not summon any strength at all. After a while, he relied on his strong willpower to suppress that force, and with great difficulty, he gathered his spiritual power and regained control of himself. I can't believe I become so strong. If it wasn't for the three-dimensional talisman's protection just now, I'm afraid that I would have to reform my body by now. Luo Fan frowned, and his heart was filled with shock. He lifted a step, and his figure was already out of the deep cave. He arrived in midair, not far from the God Dozi's position. At this moment, Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi, one was shrouded in a multicolored light, and the other was shrouded in a huge shadow. They were doing their best to fight with the God Dozi. At this moment, the two of them seemed to be able to fight with the God Dozi, and they were in a much better state than Luo Fan, who was sent flying. However, Luo Fan's body was only sore for a while after being sent flying. At this moment, the two of them were constantly spurting out blood from their acupuncture points, and they had become two bloody people. They looked many times more miserable than Luo Fan, and the God Dozi, who was facing the two of them, was at ease at this moment. The long rod in his hand seemed to be very slow, and he was waving it very casually. Everything on his body seemed to be exactly the same as before. That relaxed appearance formed a clear contrast with the sorry state of Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi. From this, it could be seen how shocking the God Dozi's strength had increased after his breakthrough. You're indeed fine. When the God Dozi saw Luo Fan flying over, his eyes lit up and he coldly sneered. While speaking, the long stick in his hand turned slightly. Luo Fan didn't see any movement, but he felt that the long stick was already heading straight for his head. It seemed that his head was about to be smashed into pieces, causing his body to die and his soul to scatter. From then on, both his body and soul would be destroyed. Good move, Luo Fan praised as he swung the red axe in his hand, drawing a mysterious trajectory in the air. In that instant, the red axe clashed with the long rod at the critical moment. There wasn't any sound when the two clashed, but the surrounding world had suddenly turned into a dusky and chaotic state. Then, the gray chaos was completely dispelled in an instant, revealing an absolute nothingness. One could even vaguely see the path to the unseen world. In this exchange, Luo Fan had already measured the God Dozi's strength, so he had already made a corresponding response. Although he was at a slight disadvantage, he wasn't sent flying like before. His body was only pushed back a few feet. His entire body violently trembled and felt a little sore. Chapter 1045. The battle god sun smiled, and his body shook. In an instant, a figure separated from his body and came before Luo Fan with a long stick. As the long stick swung gently, Luo Fan felt as if the whole world, the whole universe, and the boundless chaos were pressing down on him. Doppelganger? Projection? No. This is a kind of theurgy that is similar to two sides. Luo Fan looked at the battle god Sun who suddenly appeared, and various thoughts flashed through his mind. There were many theurgy that could suddenly split a cultivator into two. Among them, doppelganger and projection were the most common methods. Luo Fan often used these two methods. But it was obvious that the transformation of the battle god Sun was not one of the doppelganger and projection. The power of the battle god Sun that was separated was not any weaker than his original body. In fact, it was even stronger than his original body in some aspects. This was a characteristic that no doppelganger or projection could have. No matter what sort of profound divine ability it was constructed from, the essence of the clone and projection constructed from it might not be inferior to the main body. In other words, if the main body was at the innate golden immortal realm, then the clone and projection would be at the innate golden immortal realm as well. However, the clone and projection would at most be at the innate golden immortal realm that had barely stepped foot into the innate golden immortal realm, and it couldn't be compared to the main body at all because the gap in strength was extremely huge. But the theurgy of two sides was different. One body with two sides meant that the body that was separated was actually the original body. There was no difference in status between the body and the one that was left behind. This theurgy seemed mysterious. In fact, it was a kind of theurgy that was similar to pulling oneself from different times to the present to fight the enemy together. It was just that it was more ingenious. It was just more mysterious. When he understood this, Luo Fan did not wait for the battle god Sun to make a move. The bright red axe in his hand slashed through the void. In an instant, it cut through the infinite rules and laws of heaven and earth, cut through the barrier of nothingness, and even cut through the barrier between heaven and earth and the chaotic gap. It directly opened up a huge gray hole. It stood between him and the battle god Sun. Then he swung his axe slightly. The gray hole rotated slightly as if it was alive. It twisted and spiraled in the void and directly turned into a divine dragon. It bared its fangs and brandished its claws as it charged straight at the battle god Sun. Battle god Sun saw this. His eyes shone even brighter, but he had no intention of talking nonsense. He raised his hands and held the staff horizontally. With a shake of his hands, the staff turned in a seemingly normal manner. No matter how the gray divine dragon tried to dodge it, it did not matter. They were unable to dodge and allowed the long rod to strike their bodies. A muffled bang resounded. The grayish divine dragon completely collapsed in an instant, turning into a grayish existence that dissipated in all directions, leaving a thin layer in the surroundings. Gray clouds appeared. These gray clouds were completely different from the gray clouds that were formed when the world was destroyed. Previously, it was just pure chaos. Now, this was the mysterious existence that contained traces of the aura of chaos. The difference in essence was like the difference between heaven and earth. If Ashen Musi was here, he would definitely be able to rely on the colorful light emitted by the magic treasure in his hand to protect himself. He would even lose the ability to move. In contrast, the battle god Sun's performance was much better. Although he could not ignore the gray clouds and could not move as freely as if he was on flat ground, the long rod in his hand directly enveloped the nearby Luo Fan. No matter which direction Luo Fan dodged in, he would only be hit by the long rod head-on. For Luo Fan, who was able to move freely, such a performance was extremely surprising. As a cultivator who cultivated in a cultivation method that was limited to the world, although he was still affected by the mysterious existence with the aura of chaos around him and could not move freely, he could clearly sense his own existence through the obstruction of the gray haze. He could also use his battle instincts to seal off all possible directions for him to dodge. The battle god Sun's magical power was indeed many times stronger than when he was still the battle god Sun. To be able to make such progress with just a little bit of progress, it seems that the magic treasure is not simple. As Luo Fan thought so, he swung the bright red axe in his hand. More and more grayish existences were drawn down from the gap between heaven and earth and the primal chaos, causing the surrounding grayish clouds to become denser and denser, and the concealment effect became even stronger. Facing this concealment effect, the battle god Sun suddenly felt that his sense of Luo Fan had become increasingly vague. He suddenly felt a surge of excitement in his heart. This kind of battle is more interesting. As he murmured, he stirred the long rod in his hand, forming a thin layer of invisible light around his body. It was like an invisible membrane, completely isolating the gray existence around him. His eyes flickered with a faint golden light as he tightly locked onto the location where he had sensed Luo Fan's presence. This gray haze had a trace of the aura of chaos. The time, space, matter, and energy within it were all a mess. The place where he was located was naturally not the location of space, but a very mysterious spiritual connection. The place where he was looking was actually not the direction where his eyes were pointing. It was also a mysterious spiritual connection. As long as he could sense it, he would be able to see where Luo Fan was even if he looked directly at his own body, let alone in front of him. The long rod in the battle god Sun's hand trembled slightly. As the surrounding gray haze trembled, it actually began to stir. Vortexes appeared one after another. These vortexes were the reconstruction of time, space, matter, and energy. Vaguely, each vortex was a world of its own. In some of the larger vortexes, one could even see many living beings struggling to survive in them, living day and dying night. Following this stirring, an indescribable force suddenly blasted towards Luo Fan from all directions. This power seemed to be born directly from the gray existence in the surroundings. Even Luo Fan's eyes, which could see through a wide range of the gray existence, could not see how this power was produced. He could only feel that if this power hit him, he would definitely die. Even with the protection of the three-dimensional talisman, he would have to spit out a few mouthfuls of blood before he could escape. After all, this was Luo Fan's home ground. Luo Fan's reaction speed was much faster than in other areas. At the critical moment, the bright red axe in his hand suddenly turned, leaving behind a mysterious trajectory in the dusky existence. The head and tail of this trajectory connected, forming an irregular and extremely mysterious loop. Under this loop, the power that blasted towards Luo Fan from all directions seemed to have lost its target, and it covered a large area of the gray existence around Luo Fan's body. This caused the dusky existence to stir violently, producing countless chaotic scenes. Some were heaven and earth, while others were strange and bizarre scenes. The power that acted on Luo Fan's body was directly weakened by more than 10,000 times. However, it only made Luo Fan's face slightly pale, and his body could not help but stagnate a little. But there were no signs of his body being damaged. It's really powerful, Luo Fan secretly praised. Thinking about this, he raised his hand and grabbed in the air. The gray existence around him turned into a stream of power and suddenly poured into the bright red axe in his hand. He continued to construct grayish, three-dimensional talismans, one after another, replacing the power of the bright red axe. With this change, the bright red on the bright red axe became slightly dim, as if it was covered by a thin layer of gauze. However, even though its color had dimmed, the dangerous aura it exuded had become stronger. It seemed to be increasing in a way that was 10 times, 100 times more than before. During this increase, the battle god Sun suddenly felt that his sense of Luo Fan suddenly became more obvious. He still has a trump card even now. Does this person really not have any saints standing behind him? Such a thought flashed through the battle god Sun's mind. His sense of Luo Fan was not the same as Luo Fan's, which was through understanding the gray existence around him. Instead, it was through his battle instincts, and through the connection formed between the strong, he was able to sense Luo Fan, under the circumstances that the outside world did not change. The clearer and more obvious his sense of Luo Fan was, it naturally meant that Luo Fan was more powerful. And obviously, in the eyes of all the cultivators in this world, the most powerful beings in the world were the saints. Below them were the disciples of the saints. If a cultivator could be more powerful than the disciples of a saint, then he could only be the disciple of another saint. Under this kind of thinking, Luo Fan's actions had always been challenging their beliefs. In the past, the battle god Sun would not have really thought like this. However, now that he felt that he was 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 times stronger than before, the fact that Luo Fan in front of him still had a trump card that seemed to be on par with him made him more and more suspicious. With this kind of suspicion, the battle god Sun could not help but be vigilant. As for the saints, he almost stubbornly believed that they were powerful. But at the same time, he also had a kind of fear towards the saints. The calculations of the saints were made in units of trillions of years, trillions of years. If this kind of calculation involved himself, then he would not be able to escape for generations to come. If the person in front of him was really a disciple of the sage, then he could almost be sure that the person in front of him had fallen into the sage's trap by using such a method from billions of trillions of years in the future. If he had too many interactions with him, then he might also be included in the saint's calculations. If that was the case, thinking of this, the battle god Sun could not help but feel a chill. In his heart, he decided to finish this battle quickly. Whether or not he could defeat this person, he could not continue to be entangled like he had previously thought. He had to get away from this person as soon as possible. After making his decision, he no longer held back. The long rod in his hand slightly turned, and the aura around him increased by 1,000, 10,000 times. An earth-shattering aura instantly spread out from his body in all directions. Outside this dusky cloud, the battle between the other battle gods Sun, Ashen Muzi, and Wu Daozi had also changed. Before, Battle Godchild was fighting 1 against 2. Although it looked like he had the upper hand, he didn't seem to be winning. Although Ashen Muzi and Wu Daozi were covered in blood and looked battered, they were still able to hold on. Their battle with Battle Godchild could also be said to be going back and forth. But when the Battle God Sun suddenly felt a chill in his heart, the situation completely changed. The long rod in the Battle God Sun's hand turned. It easily pierced through the multicolored light around Master Ashen Muzi's body. The long rod directly stabbed into Ashen Muzi's chest, causing his entire body to violently shake. The power around his body was instantly scattered, and his entire body was directly smashed into the Chelan cliff below. And the moment he hit the Chelan cliff, a huge rod shadow suddenly soared into the sky from his chest. It directly turned into a huge pillar that could support the sky, firmly suppressing him under the long rod. After stabbing Ashen Muzi and suppressing him at the same time, the Battle God Sun no longer cared about him and swung the long rod horizontally. This long rod easily bypassed the shadow around Wu Daozi's body and directly hit Wu Daozi from the side. The power on the long rod was mysterious and powerful. Wu Daozi could not resist at all, and his body's power was completely scattered. His entire body and Ashen Muzi were blasted away, directly smashing into the ground not far from Ashen Muzi. In an instant, the ground was like a huge stone thrown into a calm water surface, creating a huge ripple. Then, the place where Wu Daozi was hit by the long rod trembled slightly, and a huge rolling shadow directly appeared. But this time, it did not suppress Wu Daozi there. Instead, it directly laid horizontally, directly suppressing Wu Daozi. Although the long rod suppressing Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi was only a rod shadow, it was in harmony with the entire world. The power of the world was the rod shadow's power. If they wanted to break free, they would have to use brute force unless they had the power to surpass the entire world. And this kind of suppression was only limited to the two of them. However, it was only limited to the two of them. It didn't even exert much pressure on the Chelan cliff itself. Therefore, although the two of them were suppressed by such a terrifying force, their bodies were still above the ground. They weren't pushed into the ground by such a terrifying force. At this moment, Wu Daozi and Ashen Muzi were both ashamed to death. This was the Qilin Cliff, Wu Daozi's dojo. One of them was the owner of this dojo, and the other was a good friend of the owner of this dojo. They even had the corresponding authority in this dojo. But at this moment, they were directly suppressed here, unable to move. They could not even use their control over the Qilin Cliff to create a space for themselves to move. How could they not be ashamed of such an encounter? However, no matter how ashamed they were, no matter how much they struggled, the two rod shadows, one horizontal and one vertical, suppressed them like the world itself. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't move at all. After casually suppressing the two of them, Battle God Sun's expression was indifferent, as if he had done something insignificant. He said, "I was suppressed by my master for 10 million years. I don't dare to compare myself to my master, so I will suppress you for 9 million years. After 9 million years, these two rods will naturally disappear, and you will also regain your freedom." Battle God Sun, you dare to suppress me? You are destroying the plan of a saint. You are seeking your own death. Wu Daozi gritted his teeth and said. The Battle God Sun had originally planned to turn around and charge into the dusky clouds in front of him to deal with Luo Fan. However, when he heard those words, a sneer appeared on his face, and he said, "I originally thought you were a character, but it turns out that you are only a so-so. If you can't win against others, you will have to rely on your backer. Fortunately, my backer is not weaker than yours. Otherwise, wouldn't I let you win? Even if you were a disciple of a saint, if you dare to destroy my master's plan, then even the Saint Master Tong Tian will not be able to protect you." Naturally, Wu Daozi would not be embarrassed by Battle God Sun's words, so he continued to threaten him. Battle God Sun was not in a hurry to leave, so he stopped in midair and said indifferently, "I am in a good mood today, so I will explain it to you so that you don't have any illusions in your heart. You usually talk about the omnipotence of a saint, but from your current behavior, I am afraid that you do not mean it. Which of the Saint Master's plans does not span over 1 trillion years? How could such a grand plan be destroyed by me suppressing you for a few million years? Do you really think that you are so important that the Saint Master's plan will fail if you leave him for a few million years?" Battle God Sun said indifferently. Each of his words was like thunder that surged in Wu Daozi's mind, causing his expression to constantly change. Moreover, how do you know that suppressing you here for 9 million years is not part of the Saint Master's plan? Battle God Sun threw out these words indifferently. Finally, Wu Daozi's expression became gloomy, and he could not say anything else. After Battle God Sun finished speaking, he no longer cared about Wu Daozi and Tsang Muzi. He took a step forward and directly collided with the dusky clouds in front of him. He completely fused with the two sides of himself that he had separated earlier. Previously, he had casually suppressed Wu Daozi and Tsang Muzi. Then, he spoke to the two of them. It seemed like he had wasted a lot of time, but in reality, he had only wasted a few breaths of time. At this very moment, the Battle God Sun was engaged in a battle with Luo Fan in the midst of this dusky cloud. Chapter 1046. The connection between the Battle God Sun's original body and the two-sided body was extremely mysterious. With just a thought, the two bodies merged into one. The moment the two merged, two deep rays of light flashed across the Battle God Sun's eyes. The body that the Battle God Sun had used to fight with Luo Fan was a two-sided body with the Battle God Sun's original body. The power of the Battle God Sun's ability was not inferior to his original body, and was even more powerful in some aspects. But the original body was the original body, and the split body was the split body. Even if the ability was as powerful as the original body, there were still some limitations on a higher level. Under such circumstances, when the ability was withdrawn and the original body and split body merged again, the Battle God Sun's ability naturally returned to its peak state. Under such a state, his performance was dozens of times more powerful than before. Luo Fan's bright red axe, which had been able to almost reach a white-hot state with him, was instantly poked by the long rod in Battle God Sun's hand. At the moment when the two collided, an earth-shattering shock wave spread out in all directions from the point of contact. The surrounding grayish existence seemed to have been twisted by a hurricane at this moment, directly forming countless tiny vortexes. These whirlpools were extremely chaotic, and one could faintly see broken worlds within them. When Luo Fan was hit, he only felt that his originally extremely smooth and comfortable ability suddenly stopped. Then, under the influence of the terrifying impact, his entire body couldn't help but fall back. In just an instant, his entire body was blasted out of the grayish cloud by this terrifying force. Fortunately, this time, he was fully prepared for the power of Battle God Sun's divine ability. Although he was blasted away in an instant. Although he was blasted away, he was only blasted out of the cloud. It wasn't like last time, where he was blasted into the chilling cliff below. It wasn't like Ashen Muzi and Wu Daozi being directly suppressed by the Battle God Sun. So powerful. At this moment, Luo Fan couldn't help but exclaim. No matter what the reason for this power was, the Battle God Sun's performance at this moment was already enough for him to exclaim in admiration. That overwhelming advantage made him realize it very clearly. There was still a considerable gap between them. This gap was not something that could be overcome through ordinary means. Under such circumstances, as long as Luo Fan was not an arrogant idiot who refused to admit defeat, he would definitely praise him. However, it was just a compliment. But it didn't mean that he had to admit defeat just like that. He stopped in midair. In the previous collision, although he was miserably blasted out of the dusky cloud and left his home ground, he did not suffer much damage due to the protection of the three-dimensional talismans around him. In the blink of an eye, he had completely recovered from the shock of his power. He had already returned to his peak condition, and it was impossible to tell that he was in such a sorry state before. With a thought, Luo Fan swung the bright red axe in his hand. In an instant, the bright red axe transformed into a river of time that spiraled in the void. In the blink of an eye, it used an extremely mysterious method to surround the gray cloud in the middle. Just at this moment, in the middle of the gray cloud, a shocking power erupted. Countless rod shadows rushed out from the gaps of the gray cloud and instantly shattered the entire gray cloud, revealing a normal space-time. There, the Battle God Sun was holding a long rod and looking at Luo Fan. Looking at his expression, he was still carefree, and there was no way to tell what kind of shocking technique he had just used. Naturally, Luo Fan was very clear about the technique that the Battle God Sun had used. Although the Battle God Sun's cultivation path was limited to the world, and he could not comprehend the dusky existence that existed in the gap between the world and the chaos. This place was after all not the gap between the world and the chaos. In this place, the dusky existence was limited, and there were not many other dusky existences that could replenish its loss. In this way, there was a possibility that the dusky power could be dispelled and destroyed by an extremely powerful force. The method that the Battle God Sun had used just now was to use the terrifying power that he possessed. No matter what incredible mysteries the dusky existence contained, he forcefully destroyed it. At this very moment, the energy that destroyed the grayish cloud was still lingering around the Battle God Sun's body. Although it was formless, it had the special property of repelling all grayish existences, causing any grayish existences to be unable to come within a few hundred feet of his body. It seemed to have formed a spherical shell that was becoming thinner and thinner. Luo Fan understood this, but he did not show any signs of shock. His expression was extremely calm and indifferent. He raised his hand and waved. The river of time that originally surrounded the dusky cloud turned slightly. Its lines became even more distorted, spiraled even more, and became even more mysterious. In an instant, it produced an incredible attractive force. It directly absorbed the existence that had broken apart from the dusky cloud. As it was absorbed, the thin veil that covered the river of time suddenly became even thicker. However, the dangerous aura that it emitted became even stronger. At the very least, the Battle God Sun felt that this aura had become even stronger. The battle god's son could not see what was happening outside of the dusky cloud at all. All he could see was a boundless, dusky world. Therefore, he had no idea what Luo Fan had done after he was blasted out of the cloud. At this moment, he suddenly saw Luo Fan display an ability that made him feel extremely dangerous. Seeing that the degree of danger was getting stronger and stronger, he could not help but frown even more. The chill in his heart, due to his previous guess, became even heavier. This person is more and more likely to be a disciple of a saint. I can't get entangled with him any longer. Such a thought appeared in his mind. After this thought, he no longer hesitated. The long staff in his hand flashed with golden light. The golden light condensed into an extremely powerful ape in the void. It was a huge ape that exuded a ferocious battle intent and a firm and unshakable will in its eyes. Although this ape had the appearance of an ape, it was like a natural warrior. It did not look weak at all and was so powerful that it could destroy almost everything. After the ape appeared, it let out a wild roar. The roar contained an unimaginable power, and it spread across the entire world. The wild roar reverberated almost everywhere in this boundless world. At this moment, apart from the peak of the sage to be, all living beings felt a supreme spiritual pressure. It was as if the entire world was enveloped by an indescribably great spirit at this moment. Everyone felt an indescribable shock. This is the aura of the third stage. Somewhere in the world, a peak of the sage to be had a complicated expression of shock and yearning on his face as he murmured. The peak of the sage to be was one of the 5 minor stages of the sage to be realm. For ordinary cultivators, even the sage to be was only a minor stage of the innate grand Luo realm. Under normal circumstances, at least theoretically, one should reach the sage realm after breaking through to the innate grand Luo realm. In other words, under normal circumstances, after becoming an innate grand Luo realm cultivator, any cultivator would be qualified to pursue becoming a sage. It was just like entering high school. It was like trying to get into a university. The reason why there was a sage to be above the innate grand Luo was because the innate grand Luo realm was simply too far away from the sage realm. It was just like how a student who had just entered high school would still be far from being able to get into a university. They would need to go through arduous study to have a slight chance of doing so. Of course, the difficulty of the two could not be compared at all. However, there was no essential difference between the two. The gap between the innate grand Luo realm and the sage realm was almost infinite. It was because of this infinite gap that there was a sage to be above the innate grand Luo realm. The sage to be was also divided into 5 minor stages: initial, minor, intermediate, great, and pinnacle. Therefore, a cultivator at the pinnacle sage to be was just a transitional stage for an innate grand Luo realm cultivator to become a sage. If there were any heaven-defying cultivators in this realm, they would not even need to go through this stage. They could directly enter the sage realm from the innate grand Luo realm and become a sage. However, no cultivator in this world, including the sages, had ever heard of such a heaven-defying existence, let alone seen one. For ordinary cultivators, they could only cultivate step by step from innate grand Luo to initial stage quasi-sage, minor stage quasi-sage, intermediate stage quasi-sage, great stage quasi-sage, and finally peak stage quasi-sage. However, since the pinnacle sage to be was the last stage of the sage to be, did it mean that one was very close to becoming a sage after attaining the pinnacle sage to be? Needless to say, that was impossible. In fact, the gap between a sage and a pinnacle sage to be was so huge that it could not be described with words. Such a huge gap was almost the same as the gap between the innate grand Luo realm and the sage realm. It could also be considered as an infinite gap. There were heaven-defying cultivators who could also directly cross the gap between the pinnacle sage to be and the sage realm. However, for ordinary cultivators, they could only cultivate bit by bit and advance bit by bit. Because of this, there were some stages between the pinnacle sage to be and the sage realm. However, at this stage, it was meaningless to divide it into 100, 1,000, or even 10,000 stages. Therefore, above the pinnacle sage-to-be and below the sage realm, there were 9 steps. When one broke through a bottleneck above the pinnacle sage-to-be, it was equivalent to advancing 1 step on the 9 steps. When one broke through 2 bottlenecks, it was equivalent to advancing 2 steps. When one broke through 3 bottlenecks, it was equivalent to advancing 3 steps. When one broke through 9 bottlenecks and advanced 9 steps, he would become a sage. If one had not become a sage by then, it meant that one would never have the opportunity to become a sage again. The aura emitted by the terrifying prowess that the battle god sun had activated and the earth-shattering roar of the ape belonged to the 3rd stage. This meant that the owner of this aura, he had advanced 3 steps above the pinnacle sage-to-be. Because of this, the pinnacle sage-to-be, that was why he was so shocked and envious of the battle god sun. Although there were many pinnacle sage-to-be in the world, most of them belonged to the category of pinnacle sage-to-be. They had not broken through the pinnacle sage-to-be and started to take the 9 steps. The pinnacle sage-to-be was the same. His cultivation realm was close to the pinnacle of the pinnacle sage-to-be, but he had not started to take the 9 steps after all. In the eyes of ordinary cultivators, he was already the closest to the sage realm, but he knew that there was still an unimaginable distance between him and the sage realm. Under such circumstances, he was envious of the aura of the 3rd stage. It's a pity that without becoming a disciple of the sage, one would not know how to take the steps. It's almost impossible to become a sage. The pinnacle sage-to-be sighed with despair on his face. As a pinnacle sage-to-be, he was already a genius in the eyes of ordinary cultivators. However, in the eyes of a sage, he was not even qualified to become a disciple of a sage. He did not even have the right to meet a sage. He had worked hard for hundreds of billions of years just to get a chance to listen to a sage's teachings, but he still could not see any hope. Situations similar to the situation where the pinnacle sage-to-be was were happening all over the world. These cultivators felt despair, helplessness, envy, and longing. However, no one dared to express their dissatisfaction towards this aura, the aura of the 3rd stage. To them, this was like how they treated Sciention Daluo. If they dared to express any dissatisfaction, they would be met with death. Then, what awaited them would be the annihilation of both their bodies and souls. This sort of thing had happened in the past, in a mysterious place somewhere in this world. This was a dignified, pure land that was enveloped in Buddhist light. In this pure land, countless Buddhist monks and sons of Buddha were cultivating. In an ordinary temple in this pure land, Divine Zen Master, who had just returned, heard the battle god sun's ape roar. His expression changed slightly. The battle god sun has indeed stimulated the power of that magic treasure to the 3rd stage. Who would have thought that we would really go for wool and come home shorn? A bitter expression appeared on God Zen Master's face as he muttered, "Senior martial brother, everyone has their own opportunities." The battle god sun was able to become the battle god sun because of his own luck. Instead of thinking about the achievements of others, it's better to work hard. At this moment, the figure of a Buddha appeared out of thin air in this ordinary temple, right in front of Divine Zen Master. This Buddha had the appearance of a handsome young man. He stood there with a dignified expression, and his entire body gave off an aura of enlightenment. When his eyes opened and closed, there was a light that seemed to be able to see through everything in the world and understand everything in the world. Junior Marshal Brother Golden Cicada, although your cultivation level is the same as mine, your mental state is much higher than mine. You can see through everything, but I still can't. Divine Zen Master looked at the Buddha in front of him and sighed. Senior Marshal Brother, it's not that you can't see through it. You just don't want to. Golden Cicada said calmly. Some things should be abandoned. If Senior Marshal Brother hadn't been shackled by the knot in your heart, how could I have caught up to you? You don't understand, Divine Zen Master said with a bitter smile. I don't understand, but I don't need to understand. The path of seeking the Tao is long and continuous. When it's time to give up, it's time to give up. It's fine if you don't understand things that have nothing to do with the Tao. Golden Cicada said calmly. Ha! Divine Zen Master chuckled. You and I have argued about this countless times without any results. Even if we talk about it now, there won't be any results. Since Junior Marshall Brother has come to find me today, you must have something important to tell me. Just say it. Golden Cicada looked at the Divine Zen Master and sighed. His eyes were full of compassion and pity, as if he was looking at a foolish person who was walking step by step towards the abyss. He was about to fall into the abyss, but he was willing to endure hardship. I can already feel the opportunity to break through. I hope Senior Marshall Brother can open the demonic earth forbidden land for me to train. After looking at Divine Zen Master with compassion, Golden Cicada sighed and bowed to him. Demonic earth forbidden land? Divine Zen Master was originally expressionless, but after hearing Golden Cicada's words, his expression changed slightly and he suddenly repeated. Yes, Golden Cicada said calmly. Junior Marshall Brother, do you know where the demonic earth forbidden land is? Divine Zen Master looked at Golden Cicada solemnly. I know very well. Golden Cicada's expression did not change much. The demonic earth forbidden land is a world that Master specially opened up in the chaos. This world relies on the main world to exist, and it draws in the negative energy left behind by the great tribulation of the main world. If it explodes, it is enough to destroy the world and destroy the universe. Although you can now exert the power of the magic treasure that Master gave you, your chances of survival are slim if you enter. Are you sure you want to enter the demonic earth forbidden land? Divine Zen Master said very seriously. I'm very sure, Golden Cicada said calmly. He looked at the God Zen Master with an indescribable determination in his eyes. This determination made the God Zen Master understand that he had already made up his mind. Even if his master, the Supreme Saint Amitabha, had spoken, he would not change his mind. In that case, as you wish. As you wish. Divine Zen Master looked at Golden Cicada and let out a long sigh. Chapter 1047. When Golden Cicada heard this, he bowed to the Divine Zen Master and said, Thank you, Senior Brother, for your help. The Divine Zen Master sighed and said, Follow me. As he spoke, he took a step forward and exited the ordinary-looking temple, arriving somewhere deep within the pure land of Buddhism. There was a deep pool here. The deep pool was hundreds of feet wide, and the water was as black as ink. Wisps of black mist floated above it. This black mist was very mysterious. It constantly changed into all kinds of strange shapes in the void. It seemed to be a heavenly demon, an demon, a ghost, or a monster. It was all kinds of strange and sinister. This deep pool was called the Devil's Pool. It was where the pure land of Buddhism sealed the devils. Legend had it that all the devils since the creation of the world were sealed there. It was precisely because of the existence of the Devil's Pool that the world became so peaceful and beautiful. Junior Brother Golden Cicada, I don't think you will change your mind no matter what I say. In that case, I won't say anything else. I only hope that you will be careful. In the Devil's soil forbidden land, even if you set foot on the second step, you will only be a weakling. You must not be proud of being a disciple of a saint. If you can't hold on, send me a message. I will definitely save you even if I have to sacrifice 100 million years of cultivation. Remember this, the Divine Zen Master said solemnly as he looked at the determined look in Golden Cicada's eyes. Golden Cicada nodded and said, Thank you, Senior Brother. The Divine Zen Master nodded. Facing the Devil's Pool, his aura began to gradually rise. His cultivation level was slightly higher than Golden Cicada's, and he was also a powerful existence at the second step. The power of his aura had reached an unbelievable level. As the aura surged, the entire pure land of Buddhism was enveloped by it. Under this aura, all the Buddhas and monks opened their eyes, lowered their heads, and chanted the name of Buddha. Their eyes were filled with benevolence. Although the aura that the Divine Zen Master was emitting was strong, it was not as offensive as the one he had emitted during battle. Instead, it contained a magical effect of comfort. No matter how strong or weak the living beings who were enveloped by the aura were, they would not feel any pressure or attack. All they could feel was comfort and happiness. That was exactly why Only the monks and Buddhas had a clear mind and were able to show mercy because of the appearance of this aura. The reason why they showed benevolent expressions was not complicated. As cultivators who cultivated in the Buddhist Pure Land, they already had a very deep understanding of the Buddhist Pure Land. They knew that every time such an aura appeared, it was when someone was thrown into the demonic earth forbidden land. And apparently, regardless of whether one entered voluntarily or passively, it was a matter worthy of sympathy, which was why there was such a merciful expression on his face. God Zen Master stood beside the demonic pool with his left hand in front of his chest and his right hand pointing towards the demonic pool. In an instant, the devil's pool seemed to be boiling, and countless bubbles began to rise from it. At the center of the pool, there seemed to be something gradually rising up. This process lasted for 2 hours before new changes began to appear. After an hour, the God Zen Master's face was slightly pale. Beads of sweat started to appear on his body and drip onto the ground. The devil's pool suddenly trembled. Then, the slightly arched surface of the pool suddenly began to spin. As it spun, the water in the entire devil's pool began to spin as well. Soon, it formed a whirlpool that covered the entire surface of the devil's pool. After this whirlpool formed, the center of the whirlpool, which was originally above the surface of the pool, began to gradually sink. In the blink of an eye, it sank below the surface of the water. During this process, the whirlpool spun faster and faster. At the center of the whirlpool, an area gradually began to spin at an extreme speed. It seemed to be extremely calm, like the calm surface of the water. Then the God Zen Master suddenly shouted, "Stop!" The entire whirlpool seemed to have stopped in that instant. Even the whirlpool that was below the surface of the water and the rapidly spinning water froze in place when the word was spat out. The entire surface of the devil's pool stopped. The space and time on the surface of the devil's pool seemed to be completely isolated from the outside world. A very strange aura emanated from the center of the whirlpool, which seemed to be very calm because of its extreme speed. This strange aura did not feel like the Pure Land of Buddhism at all, nor did it feel like the vast world outside the Pure Land of Buddhism. This aura seemed to belong to another world, a place that was different from the world where God Zen Master and the others had grown up. All right, the door to the demonic soil forbidden land has been opened. Junior brother, you can go. God Zen Master seemed to be struggling as he opened his mouth and said to Golden Cicada. Golden Cicada turned around and bowed to God Zen Master. Then, without saying a word, he turned into a beam of Buddhist light and soared into the sky. He suddenly turned in midair and landed vertically in the center of the devil's pool, where the strange aura was emitting. In the blink of an eye, he fell into the center of the whirlpool, where the strange aura was emitting. The moment the Buddhist light came into contact with the center of the whirlpool, space and time twisted rapidly. The Buddhist light seemed to penetrate a layer of space and time, instantly disappearing from the Pure Land of Buddhism and the universe that had yet to break into pieces. It was as if it had never existed. After the Buddhist light disappeared, God Zen Master closed his eyes slightly. After a while, he slowly lowered his raised right hand. The powerful aura that filled the entire Pure Land of Buddhism completely dissipated in an instant and was retracted back into his body. With this change, the whirlpool in the devil's pool, which had been frozen, suddenly shook and broke free from the feeling of time being stagnant. It returned to its original, extremely fast whirlpool. However, the whirlpool did not appear to be getting faster and faster like before. Instead, it began to slow down as time passed. After a few minutes, the whirlpool completely calmed down. The entire demonic pond returned to its normal state, as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, God Zen Master sighed and sat down beside the devil's pool. He thought to himself, I wonder how long Junior Brother Golden Cicada can hold on. I hope he has enough time to send a message back, so I can open a space-time portal and rescue him. With this thought, he slowly closed his eyes. His entire person seemed to have become a Buddhist statue, in a mysterious place somewhere in this world. That was where Chelan Cliff was located. At this moment, above the Chelan Cliff, the golden light emitted by the battle god's son's long rod condensed into an ape. The ape directly sank down and sank into the battle god's son's body. In an instant, the battle god's son's body was covered in a thin layer of golden light. It looked as if it was wearing a thin monkey suit. He held the long staff in his hand, just like the ape was holding the long staff. At the moment of his transformation, Luo Fan, who had seen all of this, suddenly let out a loud shout. His gray river of time was greatly distorted. The curvature and curvature of the river of time instantly produced an extremely complicated and shocking change. In an instant, it formed a spherical, three-dimensional talisman that wrapped around the battle god's son. This three-dimensional talisman was extremely mysterious. Floating there, it emitted a power that could destroy everything, but was unshakable and indestructible. Luo Fan's mind flashed. Countless mysterious and strange characters were continuously engraved into the three-dimensional talisman according to his thoughts, causing the aura of the three-dimensional talisman to become more and more powerful. The feeling of being able to destroy everything became more and more obvious, and the feeling of being indestructible became more and more difficult to ignore. After such a change, the power of the river of time, which carried the mysteries of the tide of time, actually increased by many times in an instant. This was the integration of all the insights, gains, and results of cultivation that this doppelganger of Luo Fan had gained. Among them were the writings about the chaos of time and space, the mysteries of the tide of time, and the mysteries of the great way of the way that he had created through his worldview of laws. All of this had created the unbelievable might of this strange three-dimensional talisman. This three-dimensional talisman could be said to be the most powerful and terrifying attack that Luo Fan could launch at this moment. If such an attack still couldn't defeat the battle god's son, then Luo Fan could only choose to escape. The moment the three-dimensional talisman was formed, the expression of the battle god's son, who had originally felt that he was wrapped in a three-dimensional talisman, suddenly changed. Indeed, at this moment, he suddenly found himself in a completely unfamiliar world. This world was boundless. There was no land, no sky, only a sun, a moon, and stars in the boundless darkness. These stars looked like suns. Around these suns, there were spheres made of land. On those spheres, there were all kinds of scenes that normal land should have. This is the world after the future was shattered. The battle god's son looked at this boundless world. With just a thought, he had already understood what was going on. He had even comprehended the basic laws of this boundless world in an instant. Gravity, the relationship between stars, planets orbiting stars, satellites orbiting planets, and stars orbiting the center of the galaxy. All these kinds of things were instantly understood by him. This is indeed a cultivation desert. To be able to cultivate to the peak of the sage-to-be in such an environment, this Luo Fan is definitely a disciple of a sage. Looking at the vast universe in front of him, the battle god's son had such a thought. At this moment, a strange figure that looked like an ape and was covered in golden light appeared in front of the battle god's son. He held a long staff in his hand, and his expression and movements were exactly the same as the battle god's son's. The battle god's son's pupil shrank. This was Luo Fan's method. As a peak sage-to-be who cultivated the way of battle, he could naturally see through it at a glance. However, this method was so wonderful that it could imitate him. Moreover, looking at the imposing manner, the aura, the charm, and even the divine light in the eyes, it was not the slightest bit different from his own. It was as if he had pulled his past or future self over. This kind of magical power, this kind of method, it was simply unbelievable. He could not help but feel shocked. This world, is this the reason why it exists? With this thought, he did not speak to the figure that seemed to be his clone at all. He waved the long staff in his hand and directly pounced toward the figure, stabbing the figure's head with the staff. This stab was many times more powerful than what he had displayed before. It was even many times more powerful than the two staves that he had used to defeat Wu Dao Zi and Ashen Mu Zi. If this stab directly attacked the universe, in that case, Even a world that was as stable as this universe that had yet to shatter into Earth would definitely be destroyed by a space-time that was as large as a continent. Facing such a terrifying stab, the figure that looked exactly like the battle god's son also trembled and raised the long staff in his hand to stab the battle god's son. The two long staffs collided seamlessly without any deviation. It was as if the two long staffs had originally been one. The moment the collision occurred, an incomparably powerful shockwave began to spread in all directions from the point of contact. In an instant, the void within a radius of billions of light years was completely shattered. Even time itself was instantly stirred into chaos by this shockwave. The surroundings of the two of them instantly turned gray. If such a change occurred in the outside world, the entire universe might directly collapse and turn into chaos. However, the situation here was different. In this universe, it was something that Luo Fan had created by relying on the mysteries of the times, his understanding of the rune structure, and his cultivation of the worldview of laws. It seemed like a complete universe and a boundless real world, but in reality, it was just a battlefield. Since it was a battlefield, how could it be so easily destroyed? In an instant, an invisible wave swept across the entire universe. The chaos within a radius of billions of light years returned to normal the moment the wave swept past. It was as if time had been reversed, and not a single trace of anything strange remained in the universe. It was as if the terrifying collision and the shocking destruction from before had never happened. The son of Battle God was extremely shocked at this moment. The power in his body surged, and all sorts of feelings of powerlessness emerged from the bottom of his heart. Even though that attack just now wasn't his strongest attack, it was still an extremely shocking attack. He didn't even think that there was a cultivator who had stepped into the third stage who could withstand that attack of his. However, just now, the figure in front of him was able to easily receive his attack. Moreover, the figure looked even more relaxed than him. It even felt like there was no difference from when he first appeared. The surging aura and power waves that appeared on his body did not appear on his body at all. Luo Fan's cultivation realm is inferior to mine, and his power is inferior to mine. How could the magic he used create a creature that is stronger than me? The battle godson's mind was filled with doubt and confusion. Before this doubt and confusion could be resolved, it was obvious that he could not wholeheartedly fight. The figure that was no different from the battle godson did not need to rest at all. While the battle godson was filled with doubt and confusion, he took a step forward and swung the long staff in his hand. In an instant, he traversed through time and space and directly arrived next to the battle godson's head. It looked like his head was about to be smashed into pieces. At such a critical moment, the battle godson instinctively raised the long staff in his hand and directly blocked the long staff that the person had blasted out. The power of the long staff was extremely vast. Although the battle godson's magic was unbelievably powerful, the aura in his body was surging and his power was surging. This block was done in a hurry, so how powerful could it be? Although this block had blocked the long staff, his entire body was directly blown away like a meteor because of this block. The speed at which he was blown away was millions of times faster than the speed of light. In the blink of an eye, he had been blown away for several light years. At this moment, the power in his body was surging and his power was surging. This aura, this power, directly opened up dozens of holes in his body. Blood crazily spurted out. Fortunately, he was still under the protection of the ape formed by the golden light. In the blink of an eye, his wounds were completely healed, and his entire body was once again unharmed. However, although his body could recover, his power and his aura could not be so easily calmed down. It was still surging and unstoppable. It was still shackling his power, making it difficult for him to unleash all of his power. This is definitely not real power. This is the basic law of this world. If I can't leave this world, I might really fail here. The battle godson finally completely confirmed this fact at this moment. The attack that he had just suffered was completely the same as his own attack. Furthermore, it was an attack that he had never used before. At the very least, it was an attack that Luo Fan could not possibly know about. Such an attack had been performed by the figure that looked exactly like him. This meant that the figure was not completely under Luo Fan's control. At the very least, the attack that he had performed and the power of the magic that he had performed were definitely not performed by Luo Fan. Chapter 1048. Just as the battle god's son had this thought, the figure that looked exactly like him suddenly traversed through the void and crossed several light years. The long rod in its hand directly smashed towards him. The power on the long rod was extremely mysterious. The golden light that it emitted even formed the shape of a golden ape. That look, that spell, that action was exactly the same as the battle god's son. Facing this long rod, the battle god's son no longer had any thoughts of fighting. All he could think about was breaking this universe and directly leaving it. Therefore, he swung the long rod in his hand slightly. In an instant, an extremely incredible force-deflecting spell was cast. The moment it came into contact with the long rod, he used an extraordinary method to deflect the power of the long rod, causing it to slide past his body. The spell cast by the figure that looked exactly like the battle god's son was extremely mysterious. If it was a normal deflection, the power contained within it naturally wouldn't leak, and there wouldn't be any situation where it would miss. Instead, it might follow the momentum and directly enter the gap where the power was deflected. However, it was clear that the strongest force-deflecting spell cast by the battle god's son was not ordinary. It was just a method to deflect the direction of the power. The force-deflecting spell was like a fuse of gunpowder. It directly detonated the power contained within the long rod in the figure's hand. During this detonation process, the power leaked out without reservation. It directly broke the time, space, rules, and even the layer of nothingness under the rules and laws of this universe. One could even faintly see the great path of this universe. However, that was all. However, it wasn't broken in the mysterious world. With this move, one could only see the great path of this universe. One could not see the gap between the gray world and the chaos behind it. The three-dimensional talisman that Luo Fan constructed with the help of the River of Time and the grayish existence was a three-dimensional talisman that could condense a creature that was exactly the same as the battle god's son to fight against the battle god's son using the aura of the battle god's son. The universe inside this three-dimensional talisman was actually a real universe. And a real universe naturally had a great path. However, this kind of great path was compared to a real great path. There was indeed a world of difference. In fact, it was not much stronger than the river of the great path that Luo Fan could conjure. The only difference was that this great Tao was condensed from all living things in the world, including time and space. It was completely targeted at the battle god's son's great Tao. This kind of great Tao, even if it was essentially only at the level of the great Tao river that Luo Fan could condense. To the battle god's son who had already set foot on the third step, it was an almost irresistible and terrifying existence. Unless the battle god's son could defeat himself, or defeat everything in the world, space-time chaos, he would not be able to resist the influence of the Great Path River. In other words, when the battle god's son had the thought of avoiding the attack of the person who looked exactly like him, of finding the weakness of this universe, and of breaking through this universe, it meant that he had taken a big step forward on the wrong path. This meant that the distance between him and Luo Fan's divine ability had increased by another step. Even if he did not react in time, it was very likely that he would have been defeated by Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan was outside the three-dimensional seal. His eyes seemed to be open and closed. His mind and thoughts were in harmony with the three-dimensional seal. He carefully sensed everything in the universe inside the three-dimensional seal. However, he did not control it. He allowed the three-dimensional seal to adjust itself and allowed the great Tao of the universe to instinctively attack the battle god's son. The article that he had written on the three-dimensional seal about all living things in the world's space-time chaos actually described everything about the battle god's son. Although Luo Fan's cultivation realm was not as good as the battle god's son's, He had, after all, fought with the battle god sun for such a long time. He could clearly sense his aura and see through the entire process of his breakthrough. Although he did not dare to say that he understood the battle god sun very deeply, he still had a considerable understanding. This kind of understanding was not enough for him to become another battle god sun. It was not enough for him to set foot on the third step. However, it was enough for him to completely understand how to duplicate a battle god sun and how to create a universe that completely targeted the battle god sun with the help of the trend of times. Because of this, the situation from before had appeared. Because of this, the battle god sun's current situation made him feel extremely powerless was produced. The power emitted by the long rod in the hand of the figure that looked like the battle god sun was extremely condensed. It did not completely dissipate like the impact force from before. Therefore, at the place where the power exploded, only a deep pit was left. As for the chaotic scene of billions of light years turning into a chaotic scene, it did not appear at all. Under such circumstances, the battle god sun's body did not receive much impact. However, even though his body did not receive much impact, it did not mean that his mind did not receive much impact. At this moment, the battle god sun looked at the 30 feet wide pit beside him. It looked so deep that one could not see the bottom. There seemed to be some kind of great Tao aura within it. There was only an unimaginable shock in the bottom of his heart. It was not that he could not achieve such a direct attack. However, it was absolutely impossible for him to do it so easily. Could it be that the creature that Luo Fan created was upgraded from my foundation? Could it be that this person is actually an upgraded version of me? Battle God Sun's mind was filled with disbelief. He didn't dare to believe that there was a divine ability in this world that could replicate a peak quasi-sage of the third step, unless his opponent was a sage. Clearly, Luo Fan could not be a saint. If he was a saint, he would not have needed to use such a technique. He could have just jabbed his finger at Luo Fan, and it would have been enough to destroy both his body and soul. Luo Fan's existence would have been completely erased from countless space-times. And it was precisely because Luo Fan could not possibly be a saint that he had such a shocked emotion. After the shock, the battle god Sun suddenly developed an indescribable fighting spirit. Since he's not a saint, this kind of duplication definitely has a huge weakness. As long as I can find that weakness, I will definitely defeat him. For the battle god Sun, who had already set foot on the third step, his knowledge and experience were not something that an ordinary cultivator could compare with. If one was unimaginably strong in a certain aspect, it would naturally have an unimaginably strong weakness in a certain aspect. He could not be more clear about this logic. Since the creature in front of him was so strong in terms of power, it definitely had a big weakness in other aspects. And this weakness, this was his chance. In just a split second, the battle god Sun had already dispelled the feeling of retreat that he had before. He had the idea of fighting with the creature in front of him, finding its weakness, and directly defeating it. With this thought in mind, the battle god Sun suddenly felt his power become more active, and his mind became clearer. His Taoist heart became more complete. I see. I was indeed on the wrong path before. The moment this change occurred, the battle god Sun had a sudden realization and understood. The battle god Sun was known as the battle god, and he cultivated the battle Tao. How could such a path allow him to have any feelings of retreat? The more he retreated, the less power he could display. The more agitated he was, the more battle intent he had, and the more power he could display. He had retreated before, so it was difficult for him to display all of his power. Now that he had developed a battle intent, the dust on his battle heart was directly wiped away. Once it became complete and thorough, his power would naturally be able to be displayed more perfectly. After understanding what was going on, the battle god Sun laughed and gently swung the long staff in his hand. There was no staff shadow, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. It was as if he was swinging an ordinary long staff. This long staff directly stabbed towards the heart of the figure that looked exactly like the battle god Sun. There was a small, hidden aperture there. This aperture was extremely important to the battle god Sun. It contained the key to a certain theurgy that he had cultivated. If this key point was attacked, it would not be fatal to him, but it could obstruct the flow of his chi, and thus cause the theurgy that he used to display would be slightly affected. Of course, this effect was not enough to make him lose, but if the effects were to accumulate bit by bit, it would eventually create an extremely shocking effect that would be of great help to his victory. This was one of his weaknesses, which was not his weakness. The person in front of him was a complete copy of him, and was even stronger than him in some aspects. Thus, it was extremely likely that these weaknesses were more severe than his. This was the main reason why he attacked that hidden acupoint. The person casually waved his staff in response to the battle god's son's poke, and the end of the long staff in his hand arrived at the head of the long staff. In an instant, the long staff in the battle god's son's hand and the person's long staff changed hundreds of millions of times in an instant. In the end, the battle godson was the one who took the initiative to attack, so he had a slight advantage. After the long staff in his hand was greatly weakened, it finally hit the hidden aperture on the person's heart. At this moment, the person flew backwards and directly flew for dozens of light seconds before stopping. The feeling of this poke was transmitted to the battle godson's heart, causing him to frown. He felt that this weakness was not much stronger than his own, and there was not much difference between them. Clearly, this weakness was not a weakness that was much stronger than him. It doesn't matter if it's not this weakness, there are other weaknesses. The battle godson's mind flashed with this thought. In the world, the one who understands you the most is your enemy. This saying was completely correct in the mortal world, but in the world of cultivation, this was not the case at all. This was especially true for those cultivators who had achieved the sage-to-be realm. If one did not have an absolute understanding of oneself, a cultivator would not be able to reach the demi-sage stage. Therefore, in the world of cultivation, this saying had to be changed to, in the world, the one who understands you the most is yourself. The battle godson was able to reach the third step of the last 9 steps before becoming a sage, so he naturally would not think of anyone else as knowledgeable about himself. What weaknesses did he have? Where did he attack? How did he attack? How much strength and how fast did he attack? What kind of rhythm would make him feel the most uncomfortable and affect his strength? No one knew this better than he did. At this moment, he was using this kind of method to greet the creature that had completely replicated him. The figure that had completely replicated the son of war god didn't stand on ceremony either. As he blocked the son of war god's attacks that targeted his weak points, he also constantly counterattacked. Countless mysterious abilities and countless exquisite battle techniques were continuously displayed during this process. During this process, the universe inside the three-dimensional talisman shattered piece by piece, and the infinite stars shattered one by one. The boundless void was constantly changing between a gray, chaotic state and a normal state. The weakness that the battle god's son had imagined was much stronger than his own weakness, and it was hidden very deeply. The battle god's son had tried thousands of moves, and almost all of the weaknesses were tested more than once, but he still could not find the weakness. On the contrary, because of the creature's counterattack, he gradually received more and more injuries, and his entire person looked more and more miserable. His aura was becoming more and more tired. However, contrary to the changes in his aura and appearance, his eyes were becoming brighter and brighter, and the battle intent in his eyes was becoming more and more intense. Even the divine abilities that he used became more and more exquisite, and their power also became more and more powerful. It was in the process of fighting with the creature that looked exactly like him. According to the opponent's response, he gradually found a way to make up for his weaknesses. He constantly adjusted himself, and unknowingly, he gradually made up for his weaknesses. This made his body and mind become more and more complete. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. In these 10 years, Luo Fan and the three-dimensional talisman were both floating in the void, motionless. Until now, there was not a single trace of change on the three-dimensional talisman, and it looked exactly the same as it had 10 years ago. And on Luo Fan's body, there was an extremely strange aura. This aura contained a kind of thorough comprehension and a kind of understanding. The appearance of this aura was due to a great breakthrough in his martial attainment, and it had become completely different from 10 years ago. His every movement, and even his every breath, the undulation of the pores on his body, the fluttering of the hair on his head, and the slight trembling of his skin all contained profound mysteries that could allow any connate Grand Luo realm cultivator to set foot on the martial path and reach the demi-saint realm. After Luo Fan cultivated the Tao fruit Great Tao that was created according to the worldview of laws, he no longer concealed his cultivation path, and it was directly revealed in his every movement. Of course, it was only the movement of his body. As for the aura and the like, they usually did not show any difference from ordinary people. Any living creature, as long as they were willing to comprehend, would be able to comprehend the mysteries of his cultivation path through the movement of his body. However, generally speaking, this was only useful for living creatures whose cultivation was far lower than his. In other words, for the current Luo Fan, if he wanted to gain benefits from Yishiwen and comprehend the profound mysteries of Yishiwen's movements, he would have to be at the intermediate stage of Quasi-Sage Realm. Only cultivators below the major stage of Quasi-Sage Realm would be able to reap great benefits. For peak sage to be who were at the same level as Luo Fan, comprehending the movement of Luo Fan's body would at most be an adjustment and would not have much effect on them. After all, peak sage to be who could reach such a realm already had their own Tao. Even if they did not have their own worldview, they must have cultivated the worldview that was not very compatible with them to a level that was deeply imprinted in the origin of life. In that case, when they looked at Luo Fan's movements and every move, they would only be able to comprehend the various mysteries of their own cultivation path. As for the various mysteries of Luo Fan's worldview, it would be impossible for them to obtain them. Obviously, they were already peak sage to be, and their comprehension would not be much lower than Luo Fan's. These mysteries that could be comprehended through conversion were already comprehended by them, so they naturally would not benefit much from it. But now, every movement of Luo Fan's body and every movement not only contained the mysteries of the Tao fruit great way that he created based on the worldview, but also a martial arts principle that surpassed the innate zenith heaven and reached the sage-to-be realm. Moreover, this kind of martial arts principle was even rising at an unimaginable speed, gradually stepping towards the level of Tao Master. The worldview of rules was a complete worldview, just like the worldview that many cultivators believed in the creation of heaven and earth by Tao. Such a worldview naturally could not only be used on the Tao fruit great way. On the contrary, the Tao fruit great way was just a cultivation method based on this worldview, and it was just a manifestation of this worldview. This worldview could actually be like the worldview of the creation of heaven and earth, which could create countless Tao of cultivation and countless cultivation methods. Martial arts was also one of them. What Luo Fan was currently improving was the martial arts principle that was derived from the worldview of rules. And the source of this improvement was the unimaginable battle between the battle god's son and his clone in the three-dimensional talisman's internal universe. The battle that had taken place in the outside world might have even caused the entire world to become incomparably chaotic